Wow, I didn't know the Wonderbolts could be so limber. This is one heck of a state dinner. But of course, the night should be fun, because we're here to celebrate the birthday of an incredible mayor that proves that you can have brains and beauty in the same package. Our final act this evening is a gift commissioned special by the Ministry of Morale to remember that life is all about the simpler times with the ones you love. Ring-a-ding-ding, fellas. I love those dear hearts and gentle ponies who live in my hometown, because those dear hearts and gentle ponies will never ever let you down. As I go trotting from farm to market, I see their smiles and cheeks. I'll bring a sweet treat and a checkered blanket to see you all when I am here. I feel so welcome each time that I return, like those simpler times from not that long ago. I love those dear hearts and gentle ponies, true friends no matter where you go. It's the place I like to be when life's bearing down on me, to see you at every opportunity. Oh, don't you see? It's a much needed retreat, so let's take some time to meet, to return to that little community. I love those dear hearts and gentle ponies who live in my hometown, because those dear hearts and gentle ponies will never ever let you down. They live the good life in peace and safety, just like it all should be. And I've got a dream house I'll build there one day, with 2 cute foals or maybe 3. I feel so welcome each time that I return, like those simpler times from not that long ago. I love those dear hearts and gentle ponies, true friends no matter where you go. No matter where you go. Home, home sweet home, it's where I'll roam. Yeah.
Good evening and welcome back to Post-Apoc Horse Talk. I'm your host, Galantagius, and this is my co-host, BG. Say hello, BG.
Good evening, everyone.
Now, before we go on tonight, to avoid cluttering and to be more expedient later in the show, if you could ask any questions during the show, BG will compile them for the Q&A section at the end. This will be much appreciated by everyone here at Post-Apoc Horse Talk. Now, our guest tonight is a friend of mine, an accomplished writer within the FOE fandom, and a massive robo-nerd, having appeared on Robot Wars. I'd like to welcome to the show, Francium. Francium?
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. And how are you enjoying it thus far?
I've been enjoying here, just waiting ready to answer your questions.
Excellent. Well, let's get right into the meat and potatoes then, boys. First question. As far as I understand, FOE Ouroboros, the main protagonist, was born in an underwater stable. Perhaps you could enlighten our audience tonight about your inspiration for this. I think it's be quite an interesting question to ask, seeing as I don't think anyone else has done something similar.
It was something that came into my head probably back when I was actually playing Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, in fact New Vegas, that there were no underwater vaults that I'd yet encountered, and it was something that I just thought, you know what, that would be really cool. There was probably some element of Bioshock in there as well, and from that, it just kind of... It's odd, I started with that as my starting point. I started with the underwater stable rather than starting with a story in that sense. And I think from that idea, I knew I needed to get characters out of the stable into the wasteland. and so there was about 5 or 6 different versions that I had of how that was going to happen, and I had slightly different character maps for that time and how it was all going to pan out. But I couldn't really decide on one. I think I just started writing it down in a book rather than typing it, and just went with what came out of my head.
I don't think it's escaped anyone's imagination that there's the obvious parallels between Bioshock's Rapture and your stable. But you say that that wasn't your original idea there. You didn't take inspiration from Rapture.
It's hard to think back because it was 7 years ago. I don't think at the time I'd actually played Bioshock. It had slipped me by. And I put the first chapter out, and somebody pointed out to me, this sounds exactly like this. And I went, oh, does that mean I've accidentally ripped something off then? So I go and look it up and go, oh, right. So what I've basically done here is inadvertently copy something that already existed. I'm pretty sure I didn't have any firm knowledge of Bioshock before I started writing this. That was not where my mind was going at all. It's built completely differently as well from a technological standpoint. But unfortunately, it does draw a lot of parallels. That said, having played Bioshock, it does give me some inspiration for certain things that I can do later on in the story. But yeah, it wasn't driven directly by Bioshock, which I think surprised a lot of people. But I think is also quite good that I'm glad I came up with the idea independently, even if it wasn't original.
Well, let's be honest here. Like, this is not a critique against you or any particular artist there, but almost certainly every idea has been done at least once in somebody's mind.
Yes, it has done. That's what's frustrating about certain things. You go, "Oh, this is a really cool idea." Oh, it's been done.
Like, you're not going to get an idea anymore nowadays that nobody has done entirely. Like, someone is will have touched that idea at some point in some work. The question, I believe, really asks, how can you make it more interesting and different from everyone else's interpretations and ideas? And I think that you've done that.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I'm kind of disappointed. It's kind of strange to myself. I created this whole underwater staple, exactly how it worked, why it worked. I've not even gone into it, and I don't think I actually ever will. But there is a more detailed background and a more detailed function. You know exactly how it operates on a day-to-day level. But I felt I needed that background to be able to write a convincing overview, even if you don't delve into the specifics. So forgotten where I was kind of going with that, but yeah, I am glad that there are details there and that it feels different. But it's frustrating that there we go. That ultimately I end up leaving that created custom world, that unique world behind, and end up just going into the wasteland. I kind of wishing I'd spent a couple more chapters down there, but ultimately, in order to get that story really rolling and have that outside interaction and have that risk, they were going to have to leave at some point. But you only really get about a chapter and a half in the stable so far. So, but it's fairly obvious that we will be coming back there. The question is, what state is it going to be in?
Of course. Well, let's not do any spoilers right now. Like, I could probably ask you the question of how this works, perhaps in a break, because I am curious at this point. But let's not, ruin anything for the audience.
Let's not, no.
Perhaps you could expand upon your inspiration for Francium, your fixed protagonist, and your user namesake.
Fran came from actually a blend of previous characters that I had for different versions of how the story started. One, I can give it away because I've not used it, and I don't think I'll ever end up using it. I had one idea, which was actually to have an enclave craft get shot down and end up crashing into or sinking. It was sinking on the lake. They'd land on the lake and it would sink and it would crash into the stable. And the characters that I had when they were doing that, a lot of them ended up being amalgamated into how Fran is now. I knew I wanted an engineer. I knew I wanted someone who was fairly level-headed, but was also kind of felt that she had to keep somehow proving herself, or had to keep pushing forward. She always wanted to find something new, find more knowledge, find more information, and I think that comes from the scientific nature of the stable as it is, and so that all kind of built up to form Fran. There are some elements of me in there because early on when I started writing, it was okay. It was easier for me to use bits of me and bits of other people I knew and other friends and relatives to start piecing together the characters. Now she's a lot less like me, and all the other characters have taken on new, more fleshed out personas, and yeah, they as a character have diverged from their initial kind of starting point as they've evolved throughout the story. But I guess that's kind of the point. But that's what happens when I've pretty much written nothing before this, and I couldn't or wasn't particularly good at planning characters from the get-go. So she's steered away from that kind of starting point and is now, thankfully, they're all their own standing characters now.
Well, you heard it here first, guys. Francium is a self-insert.
She's not quite that bad. I was really worried when I started writing that was going to end up being the case, but she's not. She's a little bit like me, but in certain sense she's not. And I suppose there's little bits of me in all of them. But I suppose that's what happens when you write a story. Unless you're really, really good. At the time, I wasn't. I'll admit that.
You're only human.
There I am.
Well, nonetheless, perhaps we should move on to the next question. So, knowing your background in engineering, perhaps you could tell us why you chose a particularly high-tech setting for your work, while we're on the topic.
I like the idea of digging into, as weird as it sounds, the science of the magic. If you're watching Friendship is Magic normally, magic just kind of happens. There's no planning. There's no setup.
Fiat.
There are just it's just spells. It's a spell to do whatever is required at that moment in time with an appropriate level of difficulty to suit the scenario, which is fine because obviously that's not what it's about. Whereas something else, say Harry Potter, you have to learn or plan that level of magic and it's quite crisp. And other scenarios for, say, technology in Star Trek or Stargate, it's all really meticulously planned and there's a very specific progression. And one of the things I wanted to do was ground the magic in something where you took the two and you melded them together, because Fallout itself is very engineering grounded, at least even if it's something theoretical that has yet to be done right now, like a fusion cell or something similar.
The magic
Fundamentally,
in the universe is grounded in a science that you can potentially understand.
That's kind of what I'm getting to. I've been waffling a bit.
It's not something that you can that simply just is. There is an element of that, of course, because magic spells do exist, but how magic and technology interact is something that you can understand.
Yeah, it was looking at that in a bit more detail and going, okay, so if you had this magic spell and it did X, how would you use technology to make that more powerful? Because that's effectively what the mega spells are, and that's what a lot of these, they've taken magic and then used technology to push it even further.
Rather, I think it more as they use technology to make whatever magic a constant casting. Because obviously, magic in universe is a taxing thing. You can't cast a spell constantly, even if theoretically you could. Technology allows you to do that.
It perpetuates things so that you can keep doing something, yes. Effectively, it was making sure that there was this link between the technology that was being created in the Fallout universe and blending it with the magic that we have from Friendship is Magic. Yeah. also seeing the positives and the negatives of that, because sometimes it works and other times it just doesn't, or you end up with this horrible creature that ends up being created or piece of technology that you're going, yeah, I really shouldn't have made this. I suppose, Jurassic Park style. You were so obsessed that what you could do, you didn't think whether you should.
Well, this is why I do like FOE as a genre. It's, how best can I put it? It does make it interesting that magic and technology works in such a way as it does. Like, for example, another universe that does it really well, which I'm going to shamelessly plug, having it recently had an update, is the Endless series. They had Endless Legends. They did a way of doing magic and technology in that I found particularly compelling. It's not that everything in there is entirely magical, though there is a large amount of it, but some of the magical elements are just suitably advanced technology. And the saying goes, is suitably advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which, to an extent, I think is true for FOE.
I have heard that in a couple of places, that you get to a point where technology ends up looking like magic because you can't work out how it's done. But the moment you do work out how it's done, it's like, wow, I didn't believe that was even remotely possible. So even certain things now, people are like, how does that even work?
Sometimes the truth is stranger than the strangest fiction.
Right.
But nevertheless. So while we were on the topic still of Ouroboros, you are the first writer I've had on that's had incomplete work up until this point. Perhaps you could tell us a little more about how writing is going for Ouroboros?
That's fine. It's still going. I refuse to let it die. Even if I have been at it for over 7 years now, which just makes me cringe. Between university, various job changes, moving house a few times, that's kind of what's got in the way mainly. You sit down and you get all your characters into your head, and you can it's much easier to let the words flow, and then that comes in, breaks it all up. You have to forget it all to remember something else, and then it's much harder to pick it up again. That said, I've got plans and I have to keep shortening them. It was a very big story when I planned it out initially, even bigger and longer than it is now, and I've had to keep bringing the goalpost in so that I actually feel like I can complete it. What I might end up doing is, if I finish Ouroboros, I might then write another one, an entirely new story, rather than trying to wrap it all into one big story. That way I don't feel pressured or compelled to just keep writing. I will wrap what I'm basically considering now the first act off. I had so much planned out that it was almost 3 acts worth of stuff and 3 different locations and planning and stuff. So I'll just complete this first section, and then depending on how I'm feeling and what's going on at the time, I might write the rest of it. But now I've also got other things that I've written as well, which doesn't help. So I've got to pick and choose my battles.
Well, that does answer a sub question I wanted to ask. If you had plans to write something new, and we can safely say maybe.
On time, yes. It's whether I'm going to force to finish the other things I've started writing.
Indeed. So I believe you successfully George R.R. Martin's your work at the point.
Checking you're still there.
Yeah, I'm still
Sorry,
here.
It went a bit weird. I lost your question there, I'm afraid. Say that again for me.
Oh, it was simply just saying that you've George R.R. Martin's your work at this point.
Yes, George R.R. Martin, or I've cut it up like Lord of the Rings, because obviously he meant to release that as a single massive novel, and he couldn't, not for not for writing reasons, but for technical reasons. They couldn't produce the books at that size, at that print scale at the time, so they decided, let's chop it into three sections. Probably a good thing.
I think you've done both. In fact, you've both had a long time between starting and where you are now, and you've chopped up. Well, you've suggested you're chopping up your book now.
Yeah, it's the only real way I'm now going to have time to, or planning to finish it. Really, as I said, I am going to finish it. I'm not going to let it just die, because so many fics they've started really, really well, and I've probably read close to 30 now, and so many have just they've either they've run out of steam, or the writers had to move on to other things. It's such a shame to see stuff left hanging, and the characters left hanging, especially when you really want to find out what happens to them. So I'm certain I don't want to let that happen to these to Ouroboros. So I am gonna keep moving.
Well, I'm going to slightly reorganize this question here while we're still on that topic of Ouroboros. Seeing as you have a keen interest in robotics, did that influence your writing in Ouroboros?
Yeah, as I got better at what I was doing at uni and my job, and seeing what was going on in the world, I've pulled in more things, and that changed how Ouroboros was written. Railguns, for example, are the basis for the law weapons, which are in the story. We've only encountered 2 of them so far. And jury is the first that method of coil guns, of accelerating projectiles like that, is effectively a railgun or a coil gun system. And when that was released and it was shown just how powerful and effective that was in real life, I was like, with magic, that immediately becomes a hoof weapon. That's something that someone can actually carry around.
Oh yeah,
and yet it does have its downsides, though. It's not just an overpowered weapon. I hope it doesn't come across as an overpowered weapon.
Well, no, sorry, my brain just farted there for a brief moment. Yes, I've always enjoyed the portrayal of Gauss weapons in FOE in general. I'm sure I'll enjoy yours even further when I finish reading.
I hope you do too. It's been I had fun designing them. Quite literally, I made them in CAD, so I knew what they looked like, and it's also been fun to see other people's interpretations of what they look like.
Very well. Moving on. I can see that Ouroboros isn't the only fic under your belt right now. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your other works.
I can go through them. I've got 3 more. Only one of them is actually finished. And that was basically written as a one shot. I'll do them in the order I actually release them, because it just makes it easier for me to think about it. The second one I started writing was called the Passage of Right, which is almost like an episode. It's a Friendship is Magic episode in its own right, rather than a completely new or original story. It's much more kind of slice of life, and it's focusing on Ember. The idea was that this idea came around when you had that initial episode for the gauntlet of her getting the staff, and the way that the dragons were treated and behaving, and kind of working off Spike. And I decided to try and write something that would press that idea on. Typically that one got interrupted. I still have all the plans for it. Again, I'm planning to finish it. I've written chapter 2 and I'm on chapter 3 now. But rather than release it and then wait a massive chunk of time, I think I'm actually going to let that one, I might finish writing it and then release it regularly, rather than doing what I've ended up doing with the Ouroboros, which is wait an entire year between releases, because it's just painful. Next one would be the Infinite Office of Destiny. This has actually had a couple of different names, and I think I'm finally happy with that title. This pokes fun at, well, it initially started poking fun at the whole prophetic naming of all the characters in FOE. Oh, it's not FOE, but in the show. Twilight Sparkle, Sunset Shimmer, all Starlight Glimmer. That series of names is always OTT Unicorn. Or Rainbow Dash is fast, and Fluttershy is shy. That styling, it obviously exists throughout the show, and it's like, why does this happen? So it started with that, and then it actually ended up rolling on into other things that just generally I find really quite interesting, even if I don't get to talk about them very much, which is like worldview, different religions, science, philosophy. I think my only real issue with this story is that there are no tags for this. There isn't a philosophy tag. So no one knows how to find it. It's got OC and Friendship is Magic as its tags. That's it.
That's
There's nothing else I
okay.
could use.
Like Okay. Well, at least for me, when I looked at naming conventions of horses, I have a headcanon on the matter. Simply, it's how can I put it? So whatever their parents name them is their name. That is just a way this is. Because that's normal for our world. I imagine it'd be normal for their world that their parents would give them a named name of some description. But seeing as we all know that horses get a talent eventually, and strangely enough, it seems that their names have something to do with their talent, I always thought that it was culturally part of their society that once you got your talent, you could rename yourself. It's a name that you give yourself that's assumed because, well, that seems more likely than some sort of magic or prophetic nature to naming conventions. It would also suggest why some people's names uh, don't seem to do much with their talent. Maybe they just decided to keep their names from before they got their talent.
I don't particularly have any particular positive or negative feelings to the way it was done. I just found it amusing. And the idea popped into my head that I think I can say it without it being an issue because you can find it out within the first like 500 words of the story of the one shot that there is a situation where somebody picks the name for your child for you, and you don't actually know this is happening, and there's an art to this, to naming ponies and naming different races and stuff, and they can see what the destiny of that name will cause, and there's this whole planning system about it. It's convoluted in a way, but I found it fun to write this idea down and just see where it went. It is in some ways it's silly, and yet at other times you look at it, and I enjoyed reading it back to people, and they're going, whoa, I've not thought of it like that before, or it pokes on other things. It starts there and then it wandered, and yet I'm really happy to where it ended up wandering to, if that makes any sense. That was a fun one to write, actually, but I am glad I actually have something that's finished on my page and it's not just hanging there.
Wasn't there one more work that you worked on?
This one is a new one, and I'm writing it pretty much right now. And this is going to be short, and it's short and painful. It's called The Phoenix and the Headstone, and it's a different take on Anonymous. I suppose I have to admit, I didn't realize what Anonymous was or where it came from. Having read it in various other fics, I figured it was a fan fiction creation. I didn't realize it was from the comics until well after I'd read various other stories. So having seen the number of different takes on this on Anonymous, the only thing I hadn't seen is this particular take. I won't say what happens, but this is going to be fairly tight. It's fairly concise, and it tackles or looks at some pretty difficult issues. It's weird. I am enjoying writing it because I think it's people should look at this, and other stories have touched on it, not just Anonymous and other issues, but it's one of the things I actually generally like about the not just the FOE fandom, but the fandom as a whole, is that people aren't afraid to look at difficult situations, and Friendship is Magic, and that world allows people to look at certain things, race, religion, gender, equality, without having to compare it to our world, and yet giving them different tools the fact that by default there are at least, there are 3 races. There are Earth ponies, Pegasi, and unicorns. That in itself creates conflicts because it's 3-way that we don't get in our world. And then you have gender, and then you have all the other different races as well, and that allows people to look at very complicated issues and pick at them in a way that you couldn't normally if you just had humans.
So you say that it allows you to open up a box of difficult questions and look at them in a lens that you just wouldn't have access to in our real world.
Pretty much, yeah. And I think it's frustrating because a lot of people looking from the outside of the fandom look, what is the point of this? And yet they miss some of the really big opportunities that it presents, even if it wasn't intended like that. But you can, and it is surprisingly It's a surprisingly powerful tool. I mean, I've seen people do this from a philosophy standpoint from scratch, but I've never seen it inside a fandom before, where there's been enough knowledge and enough information and enough willpower from people who've had issues or got issues or know people who do have issues to actually delve in and see how that pans out, and to give those who may not understand an insight that they wouldn't otherwise have, and in a way, a format that they can approach as well.
Never really considered it that way before, but I do actually think that you're somewhat right on that matter. It allows you to look at very human problems and human issues through a lens that gives it different context, but a similar answer can be drawn.
It's something you could spend an entire other podcast discussing.
Indeed.
It's very interesting, and I'll leave it hanging there. But it's
all right then, folks. Welcome to Philosophy
It's
Horse
a powerful
Test.
tool, yeah.
But yes, philosophy aside, perhaps we should continue with the questions.
Go ahead, yeah.
So another question about robotics here, somewhat. Again, knowing your interest in it, what do you think of the portrayal of robots and mechanical life in general in Fallout and FOE as well?
It's fun. There are some really interesting designs and styles, the different robots. I can't remember what they're called. The 3-legged, they've got omni wheels on the end of each legs, and you usually encounter them in Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 with rocket launchers.
Sentry bots.
Yes, the sentry bots. Those little sods.
They're not little sods. They're big sods. They're very big sods.
Yes,
they'll shoot you with automatic
big
weaponry.
Sods with big rocket launchers. Yeah, and miniguns. Those intrigue me from a construction standpoint. It's that moment when you look at it and go, why did somebody decide that was the best shape to make that? Because fundamentally, it's actually not a good idea. The Omni wheels wouldn't traverse dirt particularly well, if at all. They only really work on flat roads. They'd also roll away. Omni wheels have obviously rollers on them to allow them to do those, sideways translating movements. But that would also mean if you put them on a slope and you didn't have like brakes on it, it'd just roll down the hill.
I find that somewhat humorous. Just watching a unit of sentry bots just rolling up a hill, stop to fire on the zebras, and then they start rolling back down again.
Yep. Omni wheels don't really do slopes, which is kind of this. Well, I had this image. You said there's that scene where you go up the hill and encounter in Fallout 3 a sentry bot guarding a post that was set up, and there's like 2 or 3 of them depending on your level. But anyway, it's on this big hill, and I just had this image of them powering up, the brakes letting up, and then they're just rolling away from you, and they're trying to fire at you as they're rolling backwards helplessly. Got no power to stop themselves, just toppling over into some ditch somewhere, and you just they're going bye. And Mr. Handies as well. Mr. Handies are.
Mr. Handies, I find them somewhat just bizarre. Because how does this thing even move properly? Like, it's got one like gyro thruster that keeps it up in the air. How in the name of all that is holy does this thing move?
Plus, whenever they use their flamethrower, they'd be propelling themselves away from whatever they're
But
flaming
that's
at,
not
right?
how physics works, BG.
It wouldn't be too bad. A flamethrower isn't that bad in terms of thrust. The odd thing is now, when they originally released Fallout 3 and they had the 3D versions of those, then you could kind of fight them and see them. This hadn't happened. But now we've had SpaceX land their rockets. It's the same thing. The only difference is that they're powering down as they do it. But if they wanted to, they can make those rockets on a single motor hover just above, like they do. They make them hover just above the platform out at sea, or hover the boosters when they fire a Falcon Heavy, and that technology is technically what is keeping a Mr. Handy in the air. And by gently adjusting that nozzle, that's what's allowing them to balance. I mean, it's horrible because it means if you're standing next to it, your legs are getting burned. The idea of using them in your house is like,
Would you like to scorch
absurd.
your fucking carpets, guys?
It's like if you wanted toast, you don't need to buy a toaster if you have a Mr. Handy. That's not because it has an inbuilt toaster. That's because you could just lay them on the top of your counter and you just have to fly over them and he would toast them all for you. It's
like you need
even try.
Like,
yeah.
You practically need. What would you even have? What would you even have your floors made out of in that house? Because you'd scorch your carpets, you'd burn your laminate. Like, does all of your house have to be tiled?
Even tiles would fail eventually. I dread to think how hot the nozzles of one of those things is.
And
the noise. Think of the noise as well, the shockwave.
Keep you up at night. And just the fuel. How much fuel would you burn to keep that thing up just going?
You start looking into it and it becomes immediately apparent that is not a good idea. Fun though. I love the arms. The arms are closer to realities, weirdly enough. Now with things like Big Dog and Atlas, that kind of really high speed motion with the arms, so they're flicking things around and waving saws or tools on the end or whatever they're equipped with. That's more realistic. But fundamentally, the floating rocket just isn't.
That's why I like FOE's portrayal of Mr. Handy's more than I like Fallout 3's, because a levitation talisman at least makes some sense.
If you know you're straight up just ignoring gravity, I can see that. Whereas having a rocket running 24/7 in your living room,
yeah, pretty much. Because you'd save money on floor bills, you'd save money on children being burnt to death, you'd save money on all sorts of things, because your robot isn't setting fire to your house with a jet engine.
It's like beginning of Fallout 4. You're like, the sirens go off, and what is it? She says, "Oh no!" And then you got your other, I've got Sean. In this case, it would be, I've got what's left of Sean.
I've got the cremated remains of Sean.
Pretty much, yes. Oh yeah, those are just two, but some of the other technology and the robots in some of them are fine. The Protectrons are much more realistic. They're like Robbie the Robot out of Forbidden Planet. That kind of thing is possible now.
Yeah.
In fact, that's been and done. Kind of. They've moved away from that now. Atlas is way more mobile than a.
I would like to point out that the tech, at least in the Fallout world, they had only recently built the microtransistor. I think in the last 50 years, they had built the microtransistor in their universe.
Yeah, they were kind of slow to the mark with that one, aren't they?
Yes. Unlike in our world where we made the microtransistor pretty early on after the war, they took an extra 100 years to do it.
So where we're super, thinking we're very high speed computing, theirs is much slower by comparison. What is it a Pip-Boy has?
I think it's like
84. 64 kilobytes of memory, and someone tried to program the interface of a Pip-Boy in 64 kilobytes or 64 megabytes of memory. It's not even megabytes, it will be kilobytes, and it's not remotely possible.
Of course it's not possible.
Even from the ground up with custom written software, it wasn't possible to do it in 64K.
Let's not think too deeply about this, because yeah,
I just find it amusing that even that little detail is sort of magitek.
That's why they've got the tapes, isn't it, to
Yeah.
expand,
well, like tape
expand your storage.
Tape drives are good and all. Like they're in the real world, they're reliable. They do the job. They're perfectly fine as a device of storage. Problem is, you can't access any old chunk of it. You have to basically run the tape until you get the bit that you want.
That's the main downside.
So it's not very good for the kind of computing they want it for. Like you can't have like a tape drive of RAM. That's not how this works.
No, it doesn't work. I mean, that's a whole other thing we could dig into, but I suspect be talking about the flipping terminals would take us another whole episode.
Yeah, we could. Tech in Fallout is funny, and not even in the ha funny. It's just, why is this the way
it's
this
the
is?
WTF way, yeah.
But anyway, so we've covered all like the three main kind of robots. Actually, there is one more kind of robot that is portrayed in a Fallout game that I think is kind of like the most fun and unique one, the Securitron from New Vegas.
Ah, yes. It's just like if I'd kind of forgotten about that. I don't know why. That's almost like BB-8 in the way it balances the standing on one wheel thing. That's more that's as a method is more reliable. It's in fact it's more like a Segway now with the one wheel. That's doable. I think that would be doable. Maybe not at that scale. I think it might be too slow to react, but
I also would be concerned that with its computing power, mostly because it is hinted that these things have enough onboard computing power to accurately simulate a person. Granted, like this is the Fallout world, so they kind of waved their hand a little bit over the computing power needed to do that, but I'm just imagining the amount of computing power that you'd need to do that is quite a lot.
To what level they expect you to simulate a person. To trick a Turing test, you only need to hit 50%. At that point, it's a 50. It's obviously a pure luck whether or not you can decide whether or not what you're talking to is human or not. So, if they can get close, maybe 40% accuracy, then that's not too bad. But exactly how much power that takes, I don't know.
Thing is, though, it suggests that these things would basically you couldn't distinguish the two between a human and these robots, because it's mentioned in game that basically their minds are scans of people that Mr. House met in the past. Like he has only two sex robots and Victor. But yeah, it suggested that they have the computing power to accurately simulate the person that was scanned to be them.
That is a little more outlandish. Given the number of cells that we know that are in the human brain, that becomes really out there as a concept to do. Even scanning a human brain is very, very difficult. Then again, it's if they want to say that's fine. I mean, we might struggle now, but then again, we haven't got Pip-Boys. Well, we kind of have, I suppose, haven't we? But they're not nuclear powered.
That does raise a small question about how do they actually power the Pip-Boy? Because wouldn't you risk it like super cancer from being that close to a nuclear battery?
Depends on the shielding. I mean, if there's enough shielding around it to let you actually have a nuclear reactor on your arm, I think your arm would be stuck to the floor forever because lead. Unless there is some special anti-radiation material that they've identified that can block it much more readily.
And you may have the problem if there was enough lead to keep the radiation out, you might get lead poisoning with extended use.
Or the entire thing would just be, let me drag, not ball and chain. It would be, let me drag my Pip-Boy 3000 here across the concrete, leaving a giant groove in the floor.
But yeah,
no need to go for exercise.
Again, this is why FOE can get around these problems, because magic.
Yeah, the other way to do it would actually be to have a bit like we do now. Remote. They only transmit the data, and the calculations are done elsewhere. That would be more realistic. So if you knew a Pip-Boy was only processing local information, it was sending stuff away like a smartwatch. That's more viable. In fact, heck, that might even be possible in 64 bytes or 64 kilobytes.
But that's a big problem, though. Like, the world would have ended. Like, there's no guarantee that in the games that you would, have access to this computing power.
Yeah, it wouldn't exist anymore. Yeah, it's weird. You've kind of got one, but you can't have one without the other, and then neither of them work alone. It's given the world that we're in, it doesn't really work anymore. So,
but yeah, that's enough of what the chat suggested. The Pip-Boy 3000.
Yes, that's why it's called a Pip-Boy 3000.
It's the poundage of the fucking computer.
Number of kilograms it weighs. God, it wouldn't surprise me.
But yes, let's move on to an obligatory question now. How did you get into the horse show and then FOE? Or which one came first as well?
They happened pretty much simultaneously. I was actually introduced to this by my brother. He sent me a video of a YouTuber we both at the time followed for doing Lego animations of all things, an Aussie called Blunty3000, and he'd done this video called "I'm a Brony."
Oh,
I watched it, and my brother was like, just hang on, just hear me out. Just listen to what he says, listen to what I said, and then go and watch the first couple of episodes. And I was like, okay, fine, I will bite and see what I can do. And having watched, I think I watched the 3 or 4 episodes, I messaged him back and went, damn you, something to that ilk, and then proceeded to binge watch everything else that had been released up to that point, which was literally about a week after season 2 ended. So I basically binge watched all of season 1 and all of season 2. And this is while I was at university. I'm pretty sure I almost missed one of my exams because I ended up reading Fallout Equestria. I was that engrossed in it, and I wandered into uni to finish off some work for another project. But I happened to be heading in the other direction, reading on my phone the story. One of my course mates called me and said, "Alex, why are you going this way?" And I was just, I'm heading home. Like, well, haven't you got this test? And I'm like, hang on, I thought that was tomorrow. She said, no, it's now. So yeah, FOE almost made me miss. Mate, I can't remember the name of the thing. It was one of the ones I didn't even like.
you fucking nerd.
I had to do it anyway. Yes. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got into that. Once he'd introduced me to the show itself, he then told me about FOE, and I started reading that. And yeah, I pretty much binge read the whole thing inside of a couple of weeks, and I'm then within a couple of months I'd reread the whole thing and again. And I think that might even have been the same year I started writing. So that would have been 2012 when that show, or the end of season 2 happened. That kind of January, February, March, April, May, June, July, around then, and then we went on holiday. And during that time, I wrote Ouroboros. In fact, there's a point. The landscape of Ouroboros is based on the south of France, just with a lot more water and a lot more nuke, and not a lot more nuke. The valleys and the hills and the lakes and the water and stuff, and the big, the rocky terrain that's hard to traverse. You know, big slog up the mountains, that kind of thing. That's all based on that. Considering that's what I was doing, I was slogging my way up mountains to do these views up on the top of these ridge lines and go walking in the Pyrenees, and so that's where all that comes from. In fact, I think even that, there's a scene where they encounter a flooded bit of path where it's been washed away. I'm pretty sure I had that. I might even have a photo of it somewhere where it's just removed a large chunk of the path, except we didn't traverse up the cliff face to bypass it. We just walked back down again.
All right. So you read the whole fic twice, front to back.
Pretty much. I've probably read it 5 or 6 times now. I keep coming back to it. It's a nice reminder, and it helps me ground the story as I'm continuing to write Ouroboros and making sure it's in the same world. One of the things that as I said, it's very easy once you've got everything in your head to keep writing. Having watched season 1 and season 2, then immediately read the books, probably then rewatched some of season 1 and season 2 as, favorite episodes, and then started to write. Everything I needed to write my story was then in my head, with no ancillary information, like season 3, season 4, season 5, where other things are introduced, whereas Fallout Equestria is based on the first season. There's no Alicorn Twilight, there's no changelings, there's no Tyrek, that all happens later. So being brought out of that was annoying because it was all there. I had everything I needed, and then it got knocked out of my head by work or my degree.
It seems that life has found a way to make things difficult for you when it comes to writing.
Oh, yes, it has.
Well, nevertheless, actually, you got me curious now. What other fics have you actually written? Or read?
I'd actually have to go and look them up, and I've not even saved all of them. Is this just in general, or if I go into my library, I can
specifically I'm looking for here.
So digging. All of them actually I can pull off the top of my head, which would be Memories, Sat. Hang on, there we go. There's the list. I'm partway through reading Dead Tree. I'm partway through reading, I've got, I suppose I haven't read that one. I won't list that one out. Last Sentinel, Rangers of Wintertrot, Outlaw, Dark Shores, Wasteland Economics I've read about 3 times. Frozen Skies I've read twice. Starlight I've read. 20 Minutes, the one-shot. Broken Bonds I've read most of. Morality of Property, Rolling Bones, we go. Sat again, Heroes, Memories, and I think there's 3 or 4 more that are on this list that I haven't saved them into my stack of things that I have read.
So you'd say you probably have a pretty good understanding of FOE then?
I guess so. Some things I read them and I go, and once I've started reading, I feel I ought to feel I get other people's interpretations of the story. And you can tell when they've drawn inspiration from outside the world, and that's what makes each story new and interesting. It's just a question of making sure that you read everything, and it's very hard to then sometimes. One of the things I struggle with, having read the story, I then read another one, and then I struggle to work out which was in what story. It all ended up blending together. which is frustrating because each story in its own right was really good, and then you're like, I struggle to pull them apart because there's so many stories that have been written, and it's just trying to remember, which was actually which. That sounds really silly somehow, but that's pretty much what's ended up happening. I've ended up reading enough that they have ended up blending together, and I'm going to have to go back and read them again. Oh, I've also read. And I have to actually remind me of the name. Blackjack.
Project Horizons.
It's Project Horizons, except I got about, I guess, what would now be 2/3 of the way through it and gave up.
What chapter did you end up at to them?
I can't remember the name of the chapter. I do remember there was an undesignated mega spell in the middle of a prison.
I remember that. Yep. High Tower.
And yeah, something about that. And somehow some of them teleported out or something. And I think I'd lost it about 3 or 4 chapters previously. Something had just made me go nope. And for some reason, the yet another undetonated mega spell in the middle of a prison that's on fire, and somehow everyone is fine with this. My brain just went, you know what? I've had enough. and I just stopped reading.
I mean, you're better than most. Most people stop at about chapter 30.
Is chapter 30 that chapter?
The chapter, yes, that one.
Yeah, I read that. I think in my head, all I've done is wind backwards, and as far as I'm concerned, that's where it ends.
I did manage to read the whole bloody thing, and I promise you that if you pick up the book again, I don't think you'll find the ending satisfying.
That's one of the things. It got to the point where, as much as I liked the beginning because it was so unbiased, almost George R.R. Martin levels of I don't care whether you like this character or not. I'm dragging them face first through the mud because that's how the world works, and the world isn't nice and the world isn't kind. My problem got to where they'd been dragging them through the mud for so long they would be dead several times over, and I lost any emotional connection with the characters at that point, where I was convinced they should have died. It's like a roller coaster. It's like a roller coaster where it drops, and it only drops. There was no redemption. There was no rise again. It was just downhill. It was a bit like watching Weeds or Breaking Bad, where it just goes from bad to worse to horrendous to horrific to.
And then it never stopped.
Yeah, and it never stops. It's just a downward spiral. And some people like that. I mean, they wouldn't have finished Breaking Bad or Weeds if that had been the case, as an example. But
for me,
there's no rise again. There was no hope or roller coaster of emotions anymore. It was just they'd hit the bottom hard, and that was it.
And then they just kept digging down into the concrete afterwards.
Pretty much, yeah.
But for me, it felt more like, well, recently I've watched most of like the first 2 big parts. Well, it's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I've watched part 1, part 2, and all of Stardust at this point, and it felt like an episode of JoJo where the escalation just never stops, and it had no sense of when to restrain itself.
Yeah, I've watched the beginning of the original series of JoJo. I think I can kind of see what you mean. I've watched the first JoJo bite the dust, and now we're on to the second JoJo. I've not got that far with him, but I can see what you mean. Yeah,
I think you'll like that JoJo. I promise you'll almost certainly enjoy everything with him. But
I think he comes across as better, the second JoJo. But yeah, we'll stick to Fallout.
We'll stick to horses. Suffice it to say, it felt like Project Horizons just would not stop escalating, and the escalations got to the point where it was just like a really, really edgy, over the top anime, like really bad anime, and not like an interesting story that had real stakes. It just felt like every time they dealt with one world-ending threat, something else would just turn up and go, haha, I was actually the one behind it all along.
Giant. It's not even. It was like even worse than a Bayism. In terms
Well, at
of just
least
giant,
Michael Bay knows when to
pre-scripted
do a payout.
action set piece. Yes, pre-scripted action set pieces, one after the other, with little to no input from you as a character. So stop hammering on it, because it was a spectacular journey up to that point, and I do like the fact that he didn't keep pulling his punches just because he felt it needed, to be kept light in circumstances. It's a brutal world, and we know that from Fallout and the test. And
granted,
the Fallout in itself is, I guess he just took it a little too far. If he'd ended it at chapter 30,
a little would be a understatement, but please go on.
If he'd ended it at 30 and just stopped there and left it, that fit would be it would just be, in some ways, it's nice to see a writer that is not afraid to just
have their character fail,
cut it, because a lot of story, and a lot of characters, even ultimately, everything's all right in the end, whereas even with the way Game of Thrones ended, I've not even seen it, and yet I know how it ends because of how badly it was taken.
No spoilers for that in here. Like, let everyone find that horrible ending on their own.
Well, as I said, I've not personally seen it, and yet it's been spoiled for me, and I can understand why. So, we're like, it would have been good if you just left it there and left that point of impact be the final thing that you had. Like one of the biggest shocks in any of the FOE stories, period. Whereas, and then kept going. But I don't want to. As I said, I don't want to keep bashing it, because some of the stuff I read was really, really good.
Like, I'll admit, there was some stuff in there that I really liked, and maybe if we ever get Sumber on the show, I will praise him for it. But there is an awful lot of there to criticize, and it's very easy to criticize it. It's a lot easier to have a more fair opinion of it. It's a lot more difficult, to have a fair opinion of it. But anyway,
it's also know that sort of there's certain things in my story I'm like, really, why did I write that? But
anyway, moving on. Next question. So, how healthy, in your opinion, is the FOE fandom right now, and where do you think it's going?
Given we have just lost, actual MLP has just ended. I think we're fine. It's independent because it's tied to Fallout as well, the way that world works. I think there's still more stories to be told, although huge numbers of people have had a go at it. And I guess we need to just stop writing more stories and finish the ones we already had, because there are so many good stories out there. I said earlier that I would really love to see finished. Besides that, I think it's good. The only thing I can see, as they release more Fallout games, whether they fix 76 or not, for example, you could take that and have a different look at that. But I would like to see. It's very difficult to do, but more pre-war stuff. Well, not necessarily pre-war, but very that war inside that transition for going from the Friendship is Magic worlds to the Fallout Equestria world. But it's really tricky to do. So I would like it if some people wrote more stuff about that, but fundamentally, I think it's fine. I don't think that we've got anything particularly to worry about.
Again, I'm going to reorganize some of the questions I have here.
You're doing that.
So, another question about the FOE fandom, in your opinion. What do you think is the best and the worst aspects of it?
Remember, yeah, that's a difficult question. I like the fact that this particular combination of Friendship is Magic and Fallout has inspired just so many people to pick up a pen, or relatively speaking, to get typing and have a shot at writing, and also just the sheer number of people it's also got, reading and looking at the worlds differently, both the Fallout world and the and Friendship is Magic, and getting them to question, like we have done with the Pit Boys, to dig into them and work out actually, yeah, they do work better with magic, and it's not how where's all the lead shielding on your wrist. At points, not entirely sure. I suspect it's basically true of most fandoms that there are particular versions or stories that somehow override everything else. Like somehow Project Horizons is kind of considered canon somehow, and there's those big main fics, and you're expected to kind of read them to have to consider yourself someone who's a fan of the series, despite the fact that they're in themselves are fanfics of a fanfic. I can't think of any major negatives though. Anything that is a negative of FOE would just be a normal negative of Friendship is Magic fandom in its own right, or any fandom. Every single one pretty much suffers the same issues. So, well, I think I do like the fact that it took these two very different worlds, and Cat was able to make this blend so seamless, and the fact that inspired so many people to start writing and start drawing and modeling and sketching and making an entire game from scratch. That's a powerful thing.
Well, I would agree with you that it's been quite powerful to inspire, and I would say that probably the best aspect of the FOE fandom is that it has been incredibly creative with what could arguably be very little input. It was simply one work of fiction that spawned an expansive world even bigger than the sum total of the things it came from.
There's a lot more. There's a history there, custom created, by a fandom for a fandom, and I also like the way that it's accepted. It's not people arguing over what is and isn't right as such, because everyone knows that when they're writing their own story, their take on somebody else's as well. Everyone takes Fallout Equestria as their starting point, and then they put their own spin on it, and everyone's aware that because it's their spin, people can have their own takes and looks at certain things. It's amusing because in Ouroboros, we're going to Appaloosa, and we're doing it about 10 years before Little Pip gets there. And so I'm having to be quite careful at what I do so that I don't end up making it impossible for what happens for Little Pip to be there. That said, I could write whatever I want, but then there's no point, because then it's not happening in the same world. So it's interesting having to write around that there already exists, without interfering, deliberately not interfering with it, so that the two can coexist.
But now the more important, well, I wouldn't say more important, the more difficult question is the worst aspect of FOE.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think nothing leaps out at me. nothing leaps out to me as an issue that is specific to FOE. Put it that way. You've got individual people who obviously dislike or don't like a particular story, and sometimes you can be people can be really quite blunt or harsh in the comments about a particular story, about something they don't like. But that pretty much goes for any story or anything that's on film fiction or any fandom. So FOE has any specific issues. As lazy as that sounds as an answer, nothing stands out to me. So I think that's all I can really say on that. I don't think there's any repeat issues or any unique issues to the FOE fandom.
All right. Well, here's a slightly more contentious question, because it seems that this show likes drawing contention.
Huh.
So what was the weirdest fic, on a more lighter note too? This could be weird in, say, a meta sense and just how it was written, or weird in just the subject material.
Just in general, the stories rather than just
Well, you could probably answer both questions.
FOE in both.
Weirdest FOE fic or weirdest fic in general, whichever you prefer to answer first.
But take me a minute to think of the weirdest FOE fic, because FOE, by its very nature, is pretty weird. Weirdest story I've probably read, period, is weird not because it's just got bizarre content. It's because it's yet another example of taking two worlds and mashing them together and making it work, which would be Binky Pie,
Arthur
by
and
Miyajima.
MLP.
Binky Pie, it's taking Terry Pratchett's Discworld and blending it with them. Yes, Binky Pie. Binky being Death's horse in the Terry Pratchett novels, where Pinkie Pie takes over from Binky, who is her great grandfather. He was what's Pinky's father's name?
Clyde.
Igneous. That's it.
Well, like it was
Igneous.
The joke was it was Clyde. But yes, it's Igneous.
Igneous Rock. So Igneous Rock was supposedly, his father was supposedly nicknamed Binky, or that was his. He was called Binky Pie, and that's where that blend comes from. That name is used a couple of times in the story, and it's this blend of Terry Pratchett's Discworld with Friendship is Magic. And both worlds kind of stay separate. It's not like you mash the two together. They collide rather than overlap. I guess like Equestria Girls and Friendship is Magic, there is a meeting point for them, and it's quite distinct. So you spend time in the Unseen University, you spend time in Gantalot, you spend time with the various characters in Discworld. And that I really like, because yet again, it's done really well. It's done in a way that makes sense as much as it can do, and pulls at strange and weird questions that you don't get any other way. That they don't exist any other way until you shine the Friendship is Magic light bulb on them. It's not. It's probably the weirdest in terms of just straight up content. I mean, there's plenty of just weird fics that are just bizarre because they're just someone's picked the most stupid content or the weirdest thing or something sexual or something like that, and I've just gone, no, I'm not going to bother reading that, because especially if I went on FinFiction now and started digging, I could find something weirder. But I'll point is I haven't read it. Whereas Binky Pie, I read it, it was weird, and I loved it because it was like this mad combination of things that somehow yet again just worked in a really good way.
All right. That was not an answer I was expecting, but interesting nonetheless.
What were you expecting?
I was expecting something like Broken Steel.
I was the FOE one. I don't think I've read that. If that's an FOE,
It's a pretty memeable fic. It's very, very memeable. It's also a mashup of a mashup because it basically mashes Fallout Equestria and Command and Conquer together.
smashing. Oh yeah, here we go. Fallout Equestria, Broken Steel. Completed 2013. Okay. Again, no, I guess one I haven't read. If I was just picking an FOE fic that was weird, but it's not weird for any bad reasons. It would be the effective one shot, 20 minutes, which is ages ago, and now I'm struggling. It's looking at a zebra going to see a captured Pegasus during the war, and she's being kept as a sex slave, basically. And it's just over 3,000 words long, and yet it's a really, it's not a weird. It depends what you define as weird. It's a very odd look. It's a very odd angle to take, but that's what makes it so good. And it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's very short. It does exactly what it needs to, and anyone can read it. And it doesn't need to be any longer than it is. It literally, you could read it in 20 minutes, and I think that's kind of the point. And I think that works really well, actually.
All right. Only a couple
Bad
more
Horse,
questions.
by the way. 20 minutes by Bad Horse.
Take on Fallout Equestria fiction, because that, to go back to one of the earlier answers, that is something you keep seeing. People trying to tell long stories, then boom, real life happens, or fandom dying off happens, and a lot of them get left by the wayside. So it's actually good to have an eye on the shorter fics, that kept a manageable scope. And I ought to go out and try and collate some of those.
That would probably be a good idea, actually, because it's a very, 20 minutes is a very focused lens on something incredibly specific. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is less obvious because this sadly actually happens, and has happened, and probably will happen again. It's not something that is made up in that sense. But yeah, a very short, powerful fic. I think that's more or less what the Phoenix and the Headstone is aiming to be. A very short, condensed story, whereas a bit like I think because Cat set this massive standard of writing this really big epic story, everyone felt that they could. Well, I suppose it was a good thing because it was inspiring people to have a go. But a bit like me, life got in the way, and so many have fallen over. Have shorter, more concise stories. I do have several FOE one-shots that I've drafted out and not written because I'm like, well, I can't just keep writing new stories and releasing them when I already have one to finish. So.
Okay. Well, one more question before we move on to a short break. What is your favorite fic in the FOE fandom, and why?
Oh, in the FOE fandom, that is a tricky question.
You can't include your own work in that. You can't be an egotist on my show.
It's. Well, I'm thoroughly aware. I know I'm not going to include my story of my own robots in my favorite list of things because there's loads of shit. There's loads of stuff I'd change, but that's always the way. It's a things that I tend not to do favorites for basically anything. I don't have a favorite food, a favorite color. I have things I prefer, but not favorites, anything. So two stand out, and that would be Memories and Wasteland Economics. I don't think I could pick between them because they're completely different, and yet they're both really, really good.
All right, then perhaps you could explain to us why.
Memories is this much longer roller coaster of a ride with. It's almost like, what's that perk in Fallout 3 you can pick where just weird stuff happens?
Wild Wasteland.
And that was
That's
Vegas,
it.
not 3.
Yes. Oh, was it Vegas? Okay, so Vegas had that. It's Memories is like you've picked that as the first thing out of the gate, and it's not super dark. There are some dark moments and bits that make you go, "What? How can you do that?" And other crazy things happening. But it's a fun ride. It looks at all sorts of different things. There's so many weapons and characters, and it goes to so many places. And yet, despite while this is all going on, there's still like one thing going on throughout the entire thing, and he's not let it drop. He's not let it drop. Bobulator has not let it drop. Is Memories. You're aware of the name of the story and what's going on, and kind of just how messed up stuff is in Frosty's head all the time. And I love that fact. Is that despite the fact that you're going to all this place, she's still got this fundamental problem of what the smeg happened. And it's not finished yet. It's still being written. It's still going on. And I really want him to finish that one. And Wasteland Economics, I love for its, in a way, it's really simple. Alloy Shaper's trade of being a blacksmith, and the fact that I love blacksmithing itself, I would have, if I could do it now, I would. It's a really difficult, tricky, unique trade, and how she earns her living, and all the decisions she has to make, and all the cold, going to the Zebras and selling. This is the first thing that kind of pretty much happens. She goes there, sells her stuff, and then she still has to pay to stay there overnight, because that's how the Wasteland works. And you keep track of how much money she has and what resources she has on her at all times, almost like you would if you were actually playing Fallout, and the various factions and how they've all got their own reasons for doing things. It is Wasteland Economics. It says what it is on the tin, and I love how brutally simple the story is in the same way. There's nothing convoluted. It's not like even my own fit with this weird other stuff going on. It's ponies, guns, wasteland, raiders. That's it, and yet it makes a really good story. It ranted again.
It's fine. This is partly why we're here. But for now, let's call a short break. We'll be back with more Fallout and Fallout Question related topics shortly.
Was a hot and sunny autumn in a town so long ago, nestled close between the mountains on a painted desert floor. Didn't bother folks around them near the quiet prairie strip, but they had themselves a ranger with a big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. It was early in the morning when the ranger heard the call. He then galloped down the street but found there was no one at all. He went searching top and bottom, but he didn't hear a pip. He was there all by his lonesome with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. So he set off through the canyon, hoping soon to find a clue. If he had to scale the mountains, he would go and do that too. All to find his friends and neighbors by the duty that he swore. He would bring them back to safety, him, the 1 and 19 more. 1 and 19 more. Soon he looked out from a cliffside and did see a buffalo herd. He He went down to ask among them if there's anything they heard. The big chief told of some mothers and the totem that they fed. The town were soon to perish, they were off to take their heads, off to take their heads. So the ranger and the buffalo ran as fast as they all could. Had to find them before sunset or else they'd be gone for good. As the night was growing closer and the totem had its grip, they would die without the ranger and the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. Once they finally reached the temple carved deeply in the rock, they did spot the townsfolk tied up by a dark and bloodied block. They were so greatly outnumbered they could hardly find their breath. He thought it all was over, was about to meet his death, about to meet his death. They stormed down into the chamber, screaming loudly all around. When the ranger met the shaman, still distracted from the sound, before he could reach for his potions, out the ranger's pistol whipped. In a second it was over with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. All the others scattered distant as the totem lost its way. With the shaman's magic ended, the dark spirit slipped away. All the townsfolk came up to him, held him tightly in friendship, always thankful for the ranger with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. Always thankful for the ranger with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip.
Fast approaches as we fearfully wait. The simplest of simple creatures bound by the laws of fate. And as we shivered in the gutters, far away from home, we had lost the last vestige of hope, freezing and alone. A shadow came to us in our dreams with tales of better times. The royal princess of the night forgave us for our crimes. And as the source sister overlooked us nocturnal we became, we wore a darker armor and we carried a different flame.
You now belong to a greater good, and you answer to a higher call. You are part of the best ingredient, and there is no room for failure. You will leave behind all weakness. You are no longer immortal. You are now an indestructible soldier of the night.
As the sunset fades away, the yellow turns to gray. The moonlight shines across the land, the calling we obey. The purest blacker shadows rise to fight a greater fight. My brothers and sisters move as one, we soldiers of the night. We stand at arms before our liege, each one of us just a pawn. And now we reign supreme throughout the dark until the light of dawn. The memories we have left behind us might cripple lesser men, but those of us brought back from nothing rise to fight a greater fight. My brothers and sisters move as one, we soldiers of the night. The times we live in now have changed, honor is long gone, and now that good and evil are shades of grey, a cruel impasse is drawn. For all the good we have created, it doesn't make us right, but those of us who hide in darkness see a different kind of light. As the sunset fades away, the yellow turns to gray. The moonlight shines across the land, a calling we obey. The purest black of shadows rise to fight a greater fight. My brothers and sisters move as one, we soldiers of the night. The times we live in now have changed, honor is long gone, and now that good and evil are shades of gray, a cruel impasse is drawn. For all the good we have created, it doesn't make us right, but those of us who hide in darkness see a different kind of light.
And we're back, and let's move on to our next segment, lore and discussion. So, let's begin with our first topic of the night. Vehicles. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that Ouroboros has a vehicle in it, but how do you feel about vehicles and their portrayal in FOE Fix in general? Do you think that Fix should use more, use less? Do you think that they're and also how do they work?
It depends on the story. I knew I had a lot of ground to cover, and I knew I wanted. I couldn't just have them trekking everywhere. It would have taken forever. I could have written it just so that they found easy passage. But though I realised there was a few things I thought, you know what, I can use that and I can work it in and it will make sense. It gives me some advantages and also makes it, or gives the character some advantages and has some disadvantages. So it wasn't just like a straight up cop out on certain things. You know, there is a reason that it's there, and the reason that it exists. So in general, that's fine. I don't think there's anything that doesn't really work. I like the way the Sky Bandit works in the original story. It's useful. It's not this silver bullet for killing pretty much anything. It's definitely got its own flaws. So it's not like they're just rolling around in a tank or something like that. It's it's a useful tool, but like any tool, it's got its problems. So,
And I guess you got to be mindful of it as a tool for the characters, but also for you as the author, and to balance these two and make sure that it doesn't become a MacGuffin for the characters and a liability for the author trying to stay with his story, eh?
yeah, when I decided that I was gonna them in, because there's technically two of them. There are technically two Vertibucks in the story, and one they destroy one of them. I'm pretty sure that doesn't really count as a spoiler because the how is a lot more interesting. So it's a byproduct of something else. It's not just like they find it and it immediately works. It's you have to fight for it. You have to gain it. I guess it's like Fallout 3, where it takes you a long time to get your power armor. You've by the time you've got it, I'm pretty sure you've earned it in that point of the story. It's not like Fallout 4 where you get it within the first 30 minutes and you really haven't earned it. It makes it completely, what is it? That the death claw thing where you're just machine gunning away at it for 2 minutes and it's not really a threat. It completely breaks the whole feel and the risk of the game. You haven't earned it. A real, it was just like what?
I mean, I thought the scene was cool. Like, don't get me wrong, the scene was pretty cool in that game. But you're right,
it just came at the wrong time.
It was earned. It was just not. It was poorly timed. It didn't feel like you earned it. It wasn't at a point in the game where it felt like power armor was needed for you to get through it.
Yeah, power armor is it's like, okay, I am struggling now. I've died several times, or I'm using all of my resources just to stay alive, and it's that little respite when they put you in the suit to give you a little bit longer. But then even then, it's not a silver bullet. It has its weak points, and you have to keep paying to keep it repairing it and keep it operational. Like the Sky Bandit, they find it, they do fix it, then they have to strap plates to it to make it survive. And even then, it's not perfect, and it makes it harder to fly. And there's this trade-off between speed and durability, because it's a flipping coach. It's a wagon, basically. I kind of imagine it as like a minibus, a flying minibus, like a coach, big round wooden wheels, and quite long, almost like a stretch carriage, in a sense, with the harness out the front. I've seen it depicted as quite literally a cart, almost like the one that you kind of have in season 1 with Twilight and she being taken to Ponyville. I've seen it like that.
I always thought it was like a minivan with a harness at the front.
It's kind of mine's. I guess mine's a little bit longer. Like my minivan might have 3 rows of seats. I kind of in my have it has got like 6 or 7. So it's like quite a large, small, but it's a small coach, almost in a way. I'd have to physically draw it to get the idea across, I think. Like the Queen's, this is running around when they do the coronations or something, the Queen has that big carriage, like one of those but stretched, and with no gilding on it. But the doors, the same kind of doors that kind of open out. What's the name of the film? Well, I suppose it's in a lot of Western films. That kind of style.
A stagecoach
with the curtain. There we go. That's the word. That's the word I want. A stretch stagecoach is how I see it in my head.
Well, let's also maybe consider just quite what vehicles are in FOE. Because obviously some things don't make sense within FOE to exist. but some things do, and some things that weren't mentioned in the original fic would make sense to exist as well. Because I have no problem in my mind reconciling that there's basically personal modes of transportation in FOE, even if they were never directly mentioned. Because I always found it kind of weird that the individual modes of transport are reliant on a Pegasus driver, and it's basically just a simple chariot.
I think those are used. What's the term? If you're rich enough to be able to afford a private pilot to be able to get you from A to B, so you have to put no effort in. We're on that level.
Maybe, but I kind of interpret it as like they're kind of taxi drivers.
Yeah, that in a way. So you're paying a Pegasus to take you from A to B in a swift manner. We see in Manhattan in the show though that you have just earth ponies dragging around carts. I'm pretty sure that would be a thing as well.
Well, again, I had no problem with that because we know that sky wagons are mentioned. But do you think it weird for ponies to have cars? Like they obviously have robots. It doesn't strike me as all that weird to have cars too.
I've written that there are cars and coaches and trucks in Ouroboros. I mean, they're all abandoned and you're not using them, but they are there. It doesn't strike me as particularly odd. I don't think though you could, or maybe you can. It depends when the apocalypse happens and when the bombs fall, where people are. Because it'll depend on where all the vehicles end up, I guess. So if you kind of find it in Fallout 4, don't you? Like it happens on a sunny afternoon on like a Saturday or something.
Oh, it's a Saturday morning, I believe, like a 9 in the morning.
Yeah, so that means that should mean that a lot of the vehicles aren't on the streets. That should mean that a lot of people are at home, they're relaxing. There's not a huge number of vehicles out. Like if the bombs dropped on rush hour on a Tuesday, it'd be completely different because bombs would drop, everyone would die, and all the roads would be jammed with all these mashed up cars. So, because then you can't drive around in them. Not only are they exposed to the elements really vigorously for 200 years, but you can't use the roads because they're just filled with cars.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that it would make any kind of post-apocalyptic shootout in a city awful lot more interesting if they have to negotiate a maze of cars once they have to go through a city at some point. If the apocalypse happened in the middle of a rush hour part of the day,
they would be it would be a lot more difficult to navigate. So
it would basically turn
depends where you
every
are.
single fight within a city into a close quarter slugging match.
Yeah, and having you'd be diving through windows and crawling on glass, and you'd just have bullets ricocheting off vehicles, and people would be shooting through doors of cars and knowing that you were going to get shrapnel out the other side. It would make the combat very, very different. Whereas in the actual Fallout games, there aren't that many vehicles on the roads, which I suppose is useful to lending itself to the Saturday morning bomb drop, and there weren't that many people out on the roads. Either that, or they just didn't put that many down when they were modelling the world.
I think
there is that toss up.
It serves a more practical purpose for them. Is that it means that cover is sparing.
Yeah, because you don't want too much, but it would be an interesting fight to have to fight your way through a bridge, for example, crammed with cars, and everything is really vehicle to vehicle to vehicle to vehicle combat. You're moving the length of a car forward every single time you dash out of cover, and that's it. It's really, really intense. It's not like you can just get a sniper rifle out and go bang. There's no line of sight. It's really in your face. It would almost be like fighting in an apartment block. So everything's room to room, door to door combat.
Like you could quite easily get lost in all that, and you'd have people fighting you basically to your left and your right, and have people that are friendly to you could be lost in this sea of cars.
That would be really quite it would be difficult. It would be really difficult fighting against something like that. To be honest, you see it in all the disaster films where everyone's fleeing to leave a city, and you just end up with complete gridlock. That was going to be difficult. It also means as a vehicle, you're not going to be able to drive it around. You're not going to be able to use it to easily transport around. And if you do find a vehicle and you can get it going, you're not going to be able to use all the main roads, which I suppose is fine because you don't want to use the main roads, I guess. You'd have to find yourself some kind of 4x4. You'd have to go off-road most of the time. You'd have to find maps to navigate your way around.
Like this was
be
mentioned
cool,
in the Zombie Survival Guide of all books, that rolling around in a 4x4 actually isn't all that useful in a post-apocalypse, because they're big, they're loud, they draw attention to you, and they're somewhat they drink petrol, they drink fuel that is in a very finite amount in the post-apocalypse. Sure, in FOE they'd have other means of fuel, like they either use like gems or magic or some sort of MacGuffin to fuel them, but there's no more of that MacGuffin being made.
Well, it's pretty much what started the war, isn't it? They built the world on coal, and then they ran out of it.
Bicycles are actually really useful, and the book also suggests horses.
That would be the way to do it. Horses,
riding
bicycles,
horses.
Electric bikes, potentially. If you could get yourself an electric bike, that would be interesting, because if you can work out a way of charging it, or you put it on a voltage that is much easier to generate, say 24 volts, not mains.
Or you have some sort of dynamo attached to your chain, so you can swap over between you powering it and using the charge that you've stored up from cycling.
That would be fun. An electrically assisted bicycle. That would genuinely be good, because it means you can be cycling along, and if a zombie finds you or you're getting chased by raiders, you can just twitch the electric motor on and you can zip away.
So long, suckers! You can suck on this
pretty much
non-existent middle finger.
Eat my dirt. Eat my non-existent electric dust.
The only slight problem with those would be, the added weight. Once you reach some sort of terrain that's difficult, even with, say, an electric mountain bike to traverse, you really want to minimize the amount of time spent, lugging that shit over whichever obstacle. But yeah, electric bicycles are nice and versatile.
I don't think it would be that bad. With modern tech, lithium polymer batteries, brushless motors, it's really not that bad. I've considered, this is for me personally, but actually making my own electric bike, because buying them is painfully expensive. But I've got motors, I've got batteries, I've got wire, I've got speed controllers knocking around the house. I just need to mount it to a bicycle. That's actually the more tricky thing, actually, getting the parts. So if you were in a post-apocalyptic Fallout style universe, where if you could work out a way of, as I said, charging the thing, an electric bike probably wouldn't be that bad a way to go.
Yeah, hell, there's even conversion kits where you basically have the you replace the pedals with a set of pedals that just has the electric motor at the pedal, and you just clip these two optic sensors to your spokes, basically, to regulate it, and that's kind of it. And of course, the battery is basically in the shape of a water bottle that goes into a bottle holder like terminal.
Yes, they hide it. They hide it in the shape of the water bottle. Yeah, depends how in depth you're getting. When I went and visited China, they had loads of electric mopeds. So rather than having petrol mopeds like they used to have, they basically went all electric mopeds, and they just plugged them in at work. But it was also a complete pain because you couldn't hear them coming. You'd be walking down the sidewalk and someone would just go, actually, you know what? I'm just going to avoid this set of red lights because I know it takes forever. And so I'm just going to sneak onto the pavement and drive through all the pedestrians. When you're not expecting that, that's a complete shock to suddenly have someone going, ring, ring. You're expecting a bike, but what you actually end up with is a massive moped with 3 people on it and someone holding a sheet of 4x8. That happened, by the way. Just turn around. Holy...
Yep. That sounds delightful. And you heard it here
Impressed
first.
by his balance, though. Impressed by his balance.
So, shall we move on to the next question? I think we've kind of somewhat exhausted this idea at least a little bit. We could come back to it if the chat is interested in us going back to it, though. Hello?
Right, say that again. Sorry, something went derp.
Sorry, my bad. I was
For
suggesting
us.
that we move on to another topic.
Go ahead.
If the chat wants us to come back to this topic, though, make sure you mention to us in the chat. So,
Do you want to talk? What's on your mind? Yeah.
Next question I've got written here is, so this is a bit more of an in-depth lore question. Would you imagine that parts of Equestria might want to secede from the nation during the war?
That is an interesting question.
Because
if we assume,
obviously not everybody was 100% on board with the war at any point with it. So it does strike me as possible that forces that be may want to break away, negotiate a separate peace settlement with neutral powers or the Zebras, and just be done with all this.
I can see. It's typical because it would be Appaloosa. Any of the frontier towns deciding they wanted to be independent and just saying, screw this, we're not interested in this war. We don't have any, we don't want to get
our skin in the game is somewhat limited.
They might have, if they could, maybe there was something preventing Appaloosa from leaving, for example. New Appaloosa happens later, doesn't it? So Appaloosa obviously didn't leave, but maybe they tried, or there was some resource there that everybody needed, or maybe it was the fact that they had the railway through it that it made it really important.
I was thinking perhaps even bigger, like maybe Baltimore or like Philadelphia might have considered leaving. Like, obviously, cities are hotbeds for radical ideas. Seems entirely likely to me that people who were radically opposed to the war and had some ideas on how they could do what the Equestrian government was doing, but better, might want to use this opportunity of instability and fighting to break away.
It would definitely make FOE a very different story. Actually, that said, there's nothing to say that they didn't. Is there anything to say that they didn't?
No, like it's never explicitly mentioned either way that cities tried or didn't try to leave.
People just refer to it as the wasteland, don't they? They don't. It's either old Equestria or the cat. It's just really.
Chat, if you want to ask that thing you want to ask there, put it in the form of a question and we will get it on the question and answer session. But anyway, back to you, Francium.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think of anything that would stop that from happening. Well, Princess Celestia definitely wouldn't want it. Just oh, by the way, I'm Philadelphia. By the way, we're just gonna leave and take all our resources and production value, our production skills and all our machines with them. Or Princess Luna wouldn't have let that happen, would it? Would have stuffed over. Yeah, actually, I think most of the ministries would really have suffered that if that had happened. Wouldn't they've built their HQs
Hold on, we're having some
places.
technical issues.
Shall I play elevator music?
Issues. Connection is looking a lot better now. Moving back to main screen. And we're back. I do apologize for the technical issues, but let us try and get back into the flow and swing of things. Where were we then, Francium?
Work out what would happen if Philadelphia or one of the other cities decided to just secede from Equestria.
Indeed. So, my thoughts on the matter is that while Celestia was in power, I don't think that any part of Equestria would have willingly seceded from Equestria as a whole. Like, everyone knows she's a safe pair of hooves who's ruled for over 1,000 years with no issues. And practically, it's also mentioned that her government runs basically without her input. So it would suggest that it's basically as stable as it gets.
Pretty much, yeah.
Luna, though, now that's a different question.
A different leader, different set of rules, different time, completely different feel. I suppose if people were going to go, right, Celestia's not ruling anymore, this is my opportunity to separate.
That would be the best time for it, yes.
Pretty much, yeah.
I imagine, though, that if that ever happened, brutal repression would be the aim of the game there.
Repression, sorry?
Brutal repression. I imagine either the police would have to, contain any kind of violent action. The army would almost certainly be called in.
Hard to know. It depends how they did it. Usually, I don't know. So if I'm comparing it to other stuff that I know of, usually they'd send back in. So Equestria would end up sending someone back in to try and retake control or prevent them from moving away. I don't think that would be at the top of their priority list, to be honest. It's hard to know. They, if it was, say, Philadelphia, then yeah, they would need their production resources, and the fact that they just decide to up and out of the war would be like, no, you can't do that, because that would pretty much, yeah. If Philadelphia left with all their manufacturing capability, that could in its own right end the war.
Well, it's also to consider the fact
inability to fight back.
It's also to consider the fact that Philadelphia also has a very large population. That's a whole bunch of potential soldiers just going, fuck you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think.
Like, oh, sure, Ministry of Morale would absolutely be getting involved in this. That would be their job to prevent this from happening. I'm pretty much convinced that the Ministry of Morale is like most of their job is making sure people don't want to do this in the first place, but also to be the ones to not so gently nudge them away from that course of action if they decided to go down that road.
He would have probably been steering them away from that in the first place. She wouldn't want that to happen. The moment she got even a sniff of it, she would be
making arrests.
Like where she was in it. Depends how where she was in her
drug-fueled binge
descent. Yeah, yes. It depends how far down the road she was. Depending on her reaction. If it was early on in the war and people were thinking about it early on, then I suspect her approach would have been a lot more subtle. Later on, it would have been a question of big balloons and sending in big armies, to get the naughty ponies.
Yeah, but the thing is that I see this as an opportunity to explain why she had dabbled with authoritarian tactics later on. Like, I imagine that if this happened one time, she'd be very confused. Why are you doing this? Aren't you happy? Aren't you happy that Ministry of Morale is doing this for you to make you don't want to do this? And then they'd still try to leave, and she's forced to take even more and more extreme actions to prevent this from happening. Seems entirely likely to me that would be a very good reason why she'd be very interested in using more authoritarian tactics to keep the population in line.
Maybe that's part of why she ended up being so aggressive towards the end. She'd ran out of options, or she felt like she'd run out of options.
It would also explain why there are some people who were sympathetic, why there are so many people who were willing to collaborate against their own nation and their own race of people to end the war. Like, I imagine that in a generation where people are so accustomed to harmony, that them leaving would be the only harmonious thing they could do. Conscientiously object to the whole thing. And then suddenly Luna, someone who has already been portrayed as someone who's more morally ambiguous, tells Pinky, you have to stop them from leaving. We can't afford to lose insert city here.
So I'm trying to, it's pretty much ticking all the, hitting all the heads boxes on the head. She wouldn't want them to leave. They couldn't resist the loss of resource. They couldn't lost the list of mayor power, poof power, and breaking up Equestria in itself would just start this chain reaction.
Oh yeah, like if it's shown that the Ministry of Morale is a joke and won't stop anyone from doing whatever they want, everyone would do it.
Yeah, it would be also be a show. It would be a show of weakness on the part of Luna and on the part of. It would just be showing up Luna. I don't think it would directly be showing up the various ministries.
Oh no, the ministries themselves. The ministries themselves would not be getting too much ire from this. Maybe only the Ministry of Morale directly would get some ire from this, because they are in charge of police in essence, as well as, putting around materials to make people feel happy. It does look bad on them when people aren't happy and so unhappy that they want to leave. It would look worse on Luna, obviously, like you said. It would make her look like a weak ruler, that she's just inherited power and she can't keep her own people in line to keep fighting the war.
I don't think there's any particular way round it either. It's there's no indication that any in the story, or maybe they just cat never goes there. There's no indication that they ever tried. That said, if there were islands that were equestrian based or owned by Equestria that were not directly connected to the mainland, they might attempt it.
It would also perhaps suggest why the Pegasi were so, happy to leave at the end of it all. They had been suffering under repression.
It would be the final name or the final reason for them to shut up the sky and leave if they've been planning to do this or tried to do this before, and the fact that they did it so quickly and so efficiently, that might explain the fact that they'd tried before or had at least planned it to a certain extent.
Because almost certainly that their plan didn't involve Cloudsdale being hit, but I'm almost certain that they planned closing up the sky.
Yeah, it was surprisingly efficient given the amount of time that they had.
Oh yeah, they closed it up within hours of the end of the world. That doesn't sound like something that was done off the cuff. That sounds like something that they planned ahead of time. I even think that they planned to basically break away all of the Pegasi race at some point during the war if things got really bad. Just say, fuck it, we'll get our own peace. Fuck it, we don't want no part of this anymore.
The fact that they were obviously getting cross at Rainbow Dash for pressing more and more Pegasi into frontline service, and a lot of them would have not been wanting to do that. That would have been a perfect opportunity, or it would have been an option. Let's try and leave. Let's stop supporting the war effort. There's too many of us dying. I can see that being part of their plan, at least for a while back. Not sure who would have started planning that, especially considering that the people who would have been able to plan and coordinate that were probably in Cloudsdale at the time, which obviously no longer exists. That is
true. And the thing is that what strikes me as the Pegasi is that their command would be decentralized, because they're aware that any of the cities could be hit at any time, because obviously mega spells were well known about towards the end of the war. So they would have planned that, not necessarily Cloudsdale being hit specifically, because you can't know that, but they would have planned that maybe some of their command centers would be hit in case of the apocalypse. Because, military thinkers now plan for the apocalypse. So it doesn't strike me as all that strange for military planners in a fictional world to have planned for the apocalypse.
Especially when their apocalypse is considerably closer.
Like we know about plans in our real world to deal with the apocalypse written up by the militaries in our real world. We know that this is a thing. It doesn't even seem weird to me that the Pegasi may have planned this all along. But yeah, I think that was at least an interesting discussion on that matter.
Yeah, it's hard to know, and there obviously is there's a huge amount to go off, but it was an interesting question. What would have happened if that had happened? I suppose you're then finally even further slicing up a thing into even more fine variations on past versions and past what's the term, alternate universes. Good job that time travel isn't a thing at that point in FOE or in MLP. There wasn't time travel. That wasn't a thing.
Yeah, let's not think about time travel. Like, it does exist within the horse world, but it's not the kind of time travel where you get to change shit.
Oh, well, it never made it into Fallout Equestria, did it?
No, not
because
as
it
far
was
as
written
aware.
well. It was written before Starlight Glimmer did all her weird stuff, and it might have even have been before.
Might have been before that big old time joint in the earlier seasons.
Yeah, that's
what's the name of the episode where the Twilight time looping episode?
I don't remember the episode, but I'm sure that the audience will point this out to us. But that episode, it does suggest that time travel is possible, but time is a closed loop, and everything that you do is predetermined.
The episode was called "It's About Time."
It's kind of worrisome that the MLP universe is a deterministic one. Like, obviously, this is a philosophical discussion that we have in our real world, whether our world is deterministic or not, but we don't know in our own world. It's specifically said just by inference on the actions of people in that world that it's deterministic.
I think we're digging an even more complicated hole now.
Yes,
my brain's
we are.
gone.
Yes, we
my brain's gone. Don't go there.
It would also suggest that if we're talking about the same world, that the end of the world was predetermined too.
Oh God! Oh my word! Don't talk about predeterminism. It's going to melt my head. I mean, if you want to feel that, read my read the story. Read Infinite Office of Destiny, because it pokes on that quite a lot.
All right, just to settle that question on the time travel
plug
episode, that episode was one of the last episodes of season 2, so it aired like months after Fallout Equestria had already been completed. Like, that was in March 2012, and Fallout Equestria finished in December
2011. Yes,
yeah.
So it wasn't canon. It wasn't canon by that point. So basically, I guess at that point we can write off time travel as a thing. Does Somber include it? Does Somber include time travel in there?
Time travel is not explicitly mentioned anywhere in FOE, in his particular FOE fic, sorry.
Nor in the original.
Like, I'm almost certain that someone has written something that involves time travel, where they go back in time to try and prevent the war, and then inadvertently cause part of it, and almost certainly that's a thing.
Well, I can say it because I'm not going to write it, but that crossed my mind, and I'm like, you know what? I can't do that because I would just stir this massive bee's nest, and so many people be like, "You can't do that."
Why not? I'm a writer. I can do what I want.
That's it. Actually, I
just
suppose
dab
there
on
is
the
a problem.
haters.
There is. If that, I suppose you asked me earlier if there's anything problems with the fandom. It's going back and messing with the original, or like in
Oh
some
yeah,
way.
that is. Yeah, I didn't think that.
You don't
didn't
do
come
it.
to me at the time.
Yeah.
What we do kind of treat what K-Cat wrote as gospel.
Yeah, you don't mess with that, and I think that's what rubbed for some people up the wrong way with Somber when she was putting in like, who was it? Somebody shot Pinkie Pie, for example.
Psalm. Yeah,
Psalm,
spoilers for.
And it was just like, no, you don't do that. You don't blend. You don't take really critical bits in the original FOE story and like kind of mash them to your own needs. That's unnecessary.
Outright retcon them.
Oh yeah, like there's some other bigger ones. Like this is a bigger spoiler here, but Rainbow Dash ain't dead.
Oh God, yeah, that's. I've heard that. I don't know where that's come from, but doing that is just like no. The whole point is that
The whole point is that it was left ambiguous.
That was the whole reason. Yeah, and you don't just get to go. Oh, by the way, she's not dead. It's just like
It would even raise up the question: how is it? How does this thing be alive now? Because like your best friend try to kill you, and I put my money on her being able to kill you, seeing as she's the thing with razor sharp fucking claws and body armor.
Unless she just straight out outran Gilda, in which case she's just running away from her problems.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like something that Rainbow Dash would do. So it would mean that Rainbow Dash did either incapacitate or kill Gilda. And I don't think the killing part would be likely because she still cares about her friend, even if her friend's a massive dick.
I don't know. We did see all the other characters completely get flipped on their heads in terms of corrupted corrupted kindness, corrupted generosity with what Rarity did, corrupted magic. They all got corrupted. That was the point. So I don't know if his corrupted loyalty is just
like
running away.
Maybe, but corrupt loyalty is one of those virtues I do find it's not incorruptible, but it's necessarily resistant to corruption. Part of the fact of being loyal is partially being incorruptible to a certain ideal of a person or of an idea.
That's another tricky question. There we go. We've found a problem. People poking at the original story. As I said, I considered it, and I decided, you know what? Nope, let's not do this.
I mean, if I wanted to,
somewhere,
if I was going to write a character with corrupted loyalty, I would have them be loyal to something that's fickle, like money. A mercenary could be considered someone who has corrupted loyalty.
Loyal to the paycheck.
Loyal to the coin,
paycheck.
Yes.
Yeah, and whoever's the biggest paycheck.
That would be my obvious way of writing someone who had corrupted loyalty as a virtue. But as far as I'm aware, at least from that perspective, Rainbow Dash didn't do that. She was honest to her ideals until she died, as far as I'm aware.
So it depends. Well, she is still loyal to Equestria,
yes,
but the Equestria she knew doesn't exist anymore. So what can she do?
Loyal to a dead idea? That might be a way of writing corrupted loyalty. Loyalty to an idea that no longer works. Loyalty to a fault about that idea.
I'm willing to let go, even when it's been shown to have been pretty much completely destroyed. Then again, it would also mean that she was holding on to the better ideal. She was hoping it could change back. So,
and it also brings up a question: how could she have been loyal to both Equestria and her people? Like, you could argue
she was
that
stuck in the middle.
Like, you have. That's the problem with loyalty as an ideal. You have to choose eventually. You can't be loyal to everything. You have to be loyal to at least one thing.
And I suppose that's what got her in trouble in the first place. She was loyal to Equestria and in doing so, she earned the ire of her entire, all of the rest of her race for shoving huge numbers of Pegasi onto the front lines and getting them all killed. So she was trying to be loyal for Equestria and showing the best that she knew. She knew the best thing to fight the zebras with was Pegasi, and yet, they die by the thousand.
I'm not
That's a good point.
I'm not sure that Steel Rangers are the example of corrupted loyalty, but we'll cover that question in the Q&A section. I'd like to keep a hold of that.
That's an interesting point, yeah. Thank you, Nexus.
So, next point. Was the original fic too grimdark?
Ooh. No!
I'd
As far as
say
I'm
no
concerned,
too.
the original the games are 18 rated, first person / role playing shooters. I mean, I don't know if Cat's male or female. I guess it doesn't
We
matter.
don't know, and
But
let's not try and bring up that question because we'll never find a satisfying answer.
Yeah, and it's not really relevant either.
No, it's not. I'm just used to saying one or the other. So that's who's they. There we go. They found this incredible balance between the two worlds, and that opening scene with the slavers, Little Pip, and the scene with finding Ditsy Doo. It was like, whoa, reading that. But it wasn't out of character for Fallout. It wasn't out of character as a writing. So
I mean,
there
I'm
were
equally inclined to say
there were
no.
some dark bits. There were some really dark, messed up bits. But I'm thinking just as in Fallout is in the game. I mean, they've got fake baby bombs in prams. That's pretty damn messed up. As ideas go.
And there is some quite good visual storytelling in New Vegas that I've mentioned to a few of my friends outside of this. I didn't realize the visual storytelling being told here until very recently. When you leave Goodsprings and then head left at Gene's skydiving, you find the remains of Ringo's caravan. You find a lady caravan guard without any armor on, but you also then find a male caravan guard with his armor still on. The suggestion there is kind of dark.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but regardless, the implication there is incredibly dark.
That's one of the things that you can get away with a lot more in text format than you can visually. If you were to start rating books for their content on the visual image that they create, you would really struggle. A lot of books, you would. I mean, even like they're not even explicitly like grim dark, but there are some very disturbing sections in some of the Terry Pratchett books about the way things are written, and they're not even overtly written. It's mental things, psychological things that, and you sit down and you go, ugh. If you're just reading quickly and you're plowing through the story and you don't think about it, you probably miss them. But if you actually stop to think about some of the stuff that's laid in there, it's like, ow. It's embedded in a way. You've really got to. I suppose you've got to be paying attention. Again, as you've pointed out with that thing in New Vegas, if you're not paying attention, you're going around just looting stuff and you're not looking, and you're not going to pick that up. I mean, or you could even pass it off as a failed load on the game's part of not producing the right items on the character.
Honestly, I would also see that as
it's
a
on every
merit.
single one. So
A merit of the fandom that you also have other people reading the fics, playing the games, and offering their perceptions on stuff that you yourself might have completely missed.
don't know how many people who would have played Fallout games would have gone out of their way to read FOE. It's one of the things that surprises me is just what the overlap is like. Just how many MLP fans are fans of Fallout. It's a surprisingly large chunk because otherwise this wouldn't have taken off in the first place.
Yeah. I think it's more that people that enjoy good storytelling tend to like Fallout because Fallout started its life as a storytelling device in a wasteland. And good stories are drawing people who like good stories. And FOE, I would argue, very much is. It's not perfect, but it's a very good story.
It's a spectacular story as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the better. It's better than some professionally published books I read.
Well, let's be fair. The Twilight series was a series of books that were professionally published, but I don't think that's a really high bar to get over.
I remember trying to read a book. I think it was Kevin MacLeod, The Star Fraction. I mean, really good ideas, but incredibly difficult to read. Just not phrased particularly well, not structured very well, not laid out very well. Difficult to work out his it'd be like chunks of it were like the Council of Elrond from Lord of the Rings, where you have no idea who the hell's talking, and you're like, okay, so who's actually trying to shoot this person now, or what's going on? Whereas Cat wrote what they wrote was really good, really clear, really simple, and yet very in depth, and this really good blend of these worlds. So we've been incredibly lucky that we got it in the first place. So wandered off. I don't even know who that person is.
Yeah, let's not look at the chat, but
Let's not look at the chat.
Yes. I have a strict no politics rule while the podcast is on. Unless that politics has to do with FOE, like we had before, then yeah. Otherwise, no politics.
And just in general, please don't let chat stuff, memes or such in the chat distract you. Just keep to the, serious question.
That's fine.
But we can, going back to the previous point in the question, do we think that the original fic was too grimdark? I'm going to say no. I think we all agree it's probably no.
I think it struck a good balance. It wasn't excessive. It didn't put in, I don't think it put, if it had been too dark, it would have put people off. If it had been too light, it would have not been seen as
a Fallout fic. It would have been
as a Fallout fic. And and that perfect balance was struck. And if and as the fact that we're even discussing it now proves that balance was struck very, very well.
Yeah, I'd say so. So let's move on to the next question then. I think we've covered that one as far as it should be. So this is a more randomer question compared to the ones we've had recently. Anthro characters, do they belong in FOE fics?
In having the story written for characters that are anthropomorphic.
Yes, obviously like Gmod kind of character. You know what we're talking about. Very much like got some horse appendages and some more human appendages and body parts too. Like, for example, there's a few characters that I would consider notably anthro in the image slides. So, yeah, something like that.
Got a reference image or something for me to work off. Oh right, sorry.
Yeah,
That
anthroponies
makes
more
sense.
specifically, Nexus. Because for anthropomorphic kind of characters that already exist, I have no qualms with, and they're not even worth the discussion point. As far as I'm concerned, Diamond Dogs, Minotaurs, and Griffins, to an extent, are anthropomorphized characters that just belong there.
Yeah, they're written into MLP. That's fine. So that's not a problem. I mean, if you've deliberately written a story assuming that rather than being on for hooves, you're everything. You've taken the entire world and put them, and you've anthropomorphized it when considering the original FOE was not. That's on you, but I wouldn't have thought it'd be a particularly good idea. The whole point is that it's ponies, and the world is engineered around that. So,
I mean, I guess also it's, again, going back to, does it have a purpose in universe? Does it have a purpose out of universe for the author? Like that's the whole thing that makes that so problematic about human in Equestria stories. It's, what purpose does it serve? Is it just, for the sake of having something alien in it or something super special about the protagonist? Then it has no legitimate place in the story, really, other than, Mary suing. So if it's, a normal part of the universe, like a Minotaur, something they wouldn't really bat an eye at because it is, an established race in the universe, then sure.
got no issue with people from the human world being transported to Equestria and turned into a native race. That's fine.
Yes.
One of my favourite stories, My Life as a Bipedal Quadruped, is exactly that. And yeah, people label it as a HIE story, a human in Equestria story. As far as I'm concerned, it's not. It's someone's mind they've been transported there, but it's not a human. Whereas if you're going to do a human in Equestria, so I quite literally imagine a human standing there, in amongst all the ponies, depending on the scale. I think we've established that a pony's only 3 or 3.5 foot tall, so a human will be standing twice the height of most. They stand taller than Celestia. That kind of thing I don't think works. But in general, if you're going to do a HIE fic, then actually just having the mind of a person in the body of a pony, minotaur, griffin, cow, whatever, that works fine. In Fallout Equestria, then if you've deliberately anthropomorphized everything to make it work with your fic, I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
again,
you've
it's about
changed everything.
semantically. What is the purpose? Is the purpose merely to have, something exotic for the in-universe characters to go off at? Then no, it doesn't really have a legitimate, use of that.
Reason.
Yeah.
So your
But
argument
plus
is that it doesn't serve a purpose to have it that way.
Yeah. Basically, if the only purpose it has is to show the reader, wow, look at this exotic character who is totally alien and strange to these creatures, then, and he so happens to be, an obvious self-insert, then it doesn't really serve a narrative purpose other than, pardon the term, basically wanking.
I mean, I've seen people do Halo crossed with MLP, and they've dumped Master Chief in the middle of Equestria, and I'm like, okay, I'll let you have that because you're taking a fantasy world and you're mashing it with another fantasy world. I'll let you have that. That's the whole point of being able to write your own stories. If you want to take Halo and mash it with that, or Battlestar Galactica and mash it with ponies, you can. What I don't think is a particularly good idea is just taking you and dropping you in the middle of Equestria.
Yeah,
It's an easy write.
I think I might have kind of wandered away from the key point. Like you're arguing against human in Equestria kind of stories because it doesn't serve a narrative purpose, which that's fine. I'm talking about if the whole is there a problem
Yes,
with
yeah,
having
that's
as if the whole world was anthropomorphized. So, like, say, not necessarily Equestria girls, but more like that.
Oh, you
yeah,
mean so in
that
general,
was where I
all
was.
characters are anthropomorphized, for example, you're saying?
Yes, like would the is there any kind of I'm not sure what I'm trying to drive at here.
I think I know what you're getting at. It's the original FOE fit was written assuming that all of the characters were on four hooves, effectively.
I kind of
If
agree
you
with
write your story
Nexus
from the
has
angle,
suggested it's a stylistic choice.
if you're already taking the entire world, it changes the mechanics of the world. Certain elements of the world only work on four hooves. Certain things like the Steel Rangers, you couldn't have a belt-fed minigun. I mean, you can hold a belt-fed minigun as a person, but then the various other systems that are built into the suit don't work in quite the same way as they would if you're standing up like a human. Various other things don't work. The way that some of the buildings are laid out don't work if you rearrange, the fundamental shape of the characters in that world. I'm pretty sure several things would fall over. I can see why people do it because it's easier to write. I mean, I've had to go back and check when I've written something that I've not written it in a way that is actually, human, because that's what comes naturally. I'm actually having to consciously check whether what I've written makes sense for having four hooves. But yeah, somebody deliberately takes their story and writes it as an anthro story, despite and have it still be FOE. I mean, they can do it. I think but there's nothing wrong with putting a little bit of extra effort in to work out how things would actually work without that, because it's easier to write if you're anthro mentally. It's easier to wrap your head around, and it's easier to talk about, and you know how guns work. Whereas I had to, when I designed Jury, for example, Jury is shaped like a standard gun, but it has no trigger. It's triggered by magic, which means it can't be used by Pegasi or Earth ponies. It can only be used by unicorns. That was a design choice. And I realized that, and I went, okay, that's had to happen now. I've made this choice. I don't think I even realized I'd done it. The fact that it doesn't have a trigger and it's triggered by the spell, and in order to aim it, you have to hold it in your magic. You could jury rig it on something for a Pegasi to hold, or an Earth Bunny to hold, but fundamentally it's fired by magic through VATs. So no, SATs. Yes, SATs. So at the top, when I chose to do that, I realized that is a choice I've had to make because of the fact that I've got four hooves and magic, not a hand. As I said, I suspect they'll.
I mean, that would suggest why. Well, I would say that it makes writing griffins and minotaurs notably easier. Well, and hellhounds and diamond dogs by extension too, because they have hands to one extent or another.
Yes, it's easier if your main character is a griffin. It's a lot easier for you to wrap your head around. Whereas if you're writing and your main character is a pony who isn't a unicorn, that becomes a lot trickier because unicorns can pretty much just grab anything and point it wherever they want.
Which is why, unlike our previous guest, No One, I quite like the idea of battle saddles. Like,
yeah, which is what.
Granted, he made a very valid point that it's almost impossible to actually aim these things, so given that they're on your side and not where your eye is. But
I think you get used to it.
I imagine you would get used to it. You'd have some kind of targeting reticule on some kind of pre-war saddles that would connect into a helmet or your armor. That would give you an idea where you're aiming your guns that way, so that doing some calculations in your saddle, you can aim it at a target and it would hit where you want it to go. But post-war, it would make that notably more difficult unless you're doing things that don't really care for accuracy so much, like automatics and explosives, things that have splash or just fire a volume of fire out.
But firing, I mean, this is going into real world stuff, but like World War II planes, the guns were mounted on the wings sometimes. and they wouldn't have. As a kid, I always thought they were tapered in slightly to aim at a point at the front of the plane, but they're not. They're straight, and so you're having to account for the fact that the thing that you're shooting at is moving very, very quickly. There's gravity, there's wind resistance, there's all sorts of things, but ultimately you're still aiming to hit them, despite the fact that your guns are nowhere near your line of sight. Now, obviously, they did that design where they were shooting bullets through the blades by synchronizing the rotation of the propeller with the firing of the guns, so that they could put the guns right in front of the pilot. So it was a much more natural feeling for them to shoot. But it's not like, having, guns mounted on either side of the fuselage or on the wings is a disadvantage, because it clearly worked. They could rack up 3 or 4 guns on either wing and just fill the
I
the
also
air with lead.
believe, at least in that circumstance, it depended a lot on the purpose of the aircraft. Like, for example, if it was a fighter plane, having the guns be in the nose of the plane would make more sense, because you're better at shooting down other planes with guns that you can aim more accurately. If you're looking for ground assault, then guns mounted on the wings, it wouldn't matter if your accuracy so much. You're basically looking to attack foes that would be together or a large target on the ground.
Yeah. I suspect in that world, if they were designing them, they would have come up with a way around it, or there would be an established method or thought process for getting around it. I mean, we're pretty lucky, the fact that we've got both our eyes at the front of our heads for distance stuff, but we've still had to work out the best way of making a reticule. And a dot sight is really, really useful, but fundamentally that's an evolution of the 2 iron sights. And before that, when we had crossbows, we were still working out how to hold the thing, because the arrow, you'd bring it up to your eye, but even then you're having to correct for the drop over time, and you're twisting the bow slightly and all of that. So the fact that it's down on your head and right a bit, I reckon you can work your way around that. And if you know what the gun is, and you're aiming, and saying what your offset is, you can build that into your your sight or on your visor. Aiming those kinds of weapons isn't such a I don't think it's much as an issue as you might think, or people might think. I reckon they come up with a way around it.
All right. Let's move on to the final topic of the discussion part of the show: alcohol in the post-apocalypse. I bring this up with that it's quite common in fics for people to find alcohol that was made in the pre-war that is of notable quality, be it Wild Pegasus or Apple Jack Daniels or whatever kind of plot point that you want to make in the in this particular bottle that exists. My thought on this matter, though, is why would there even be that in the post-apocalypse? For a number of reasons, I don't think there would be this stuff in the post-apocalypse. First of which being simply supply. There would be plenty of people looking for alcohol not long after the apocalypse, either for surgery reasons, drinking their sorrows away, or looking for something that could be traded for something they need. So there wouldn't be a lot of stuff. Like, at least in the Fallout world, there almost certainly wouldn't be a lot of stuff. I grant that in FOE, they have preserve spells on bottles which are likely to keep things around for a very long period of time. So assuming that there was bottles still around, I could believe that they'd be still good. But I also imagine this from the perspective of potentially third parties and the Zebras who may not have that ability to put preserve stuff on their stuff. That stuff wouldn't be good anymore. It would either just turn to vinegar or just be no good. And responding directly to Star Hoarder here, no, that's not how preservatives work.
I'm pretty sure that
don't keep things good forever.
There's a limited time span. There's a reason things have an expiration date. Even tubs of pickle. I mean, it might be expiration date might be 2022, but that's still only 3 or 4 years away. That's a short time relative to us. It's a long time relative to us, but
I mean,
200 years
there
locked
is
underground. That's very different.
thing is with the things on pickles is that they can go longer than their use by dates, notably further than that, as long as the seal is still good. But that's still the thought is that even this has its limits. With entirely mundane preservation techniques, there just wouldn't be anything from the pre-war left behind that would be safe to eat.
Pretty much, no. Would have all disintegrated.
It would either been
The
turned
only
to
things I can
mush,
think of,
or just be poisonous.
yeah,
I
anything that
get-
was in a plastic bag would have disintegrated, like crisps, that would be dead. Anything that was in cardboard would have disintegrated. The only thing I can think that would survive was anything that was in a glass bottle and had a stainless steel cap of some description. Anything that has a blended plastic or composite cap to save money is not going to survive. Partly because the cap would rust, and then that would let the seal would break, and then it would contaminate whatever was in it, and it would either evaporate or
spoil.
if you spoiled in some way, or for example, wine, the cork would disintegrate. You know, Dad collects large quantities of wine. I think the oldest bottle we have is older than me.
That's a fair point that Nexus brings
but
up.
That's still 30 years.
But that's a point Nexus brings up here. One has to consider, is it worth their time to make everything have a magical preservation seal on it? Because that's magic that you could be using for other potentially more efficient uses. Other things that need to be kept for longer, or like weapons and armor that need to be preserved.
I suspect what are they called? Nuka-Cola bottle machines. I suspect they would put a device in it to preserve the cola bottles because it's worth them keeping the stuff alive for as long as they can. It probably wouldn't have been that difficult at the time to do that, and as long as the thing still had power, depending on how they powered it, I'm willing to let that slide over 200 years. So anything that was, it still had power, it still had the preservation spell, and the things were still sealed. So people were able to then 100, 200 years later break the thing open and take the bottles. They're then on the clock again. So after 5 years, they'd probably be gone. They couldn't keep them much longer than that. But I suspect they wouldn't. They'd drink them the moment they got them. So
yeah, obviously
that kind of thing
flat,
I'm fine
because
with.
I don't think that it may be a preservation spell, but it's not a stasis spell.
It depends what they were trying to do. Although I don't know. This is the kind of, I guess this is not a problem as such. It's, I don't know what the hell you do. You'd have to go and find someone who like bought World War II food and ask them what state it was in. As I'm pretty sure they did. Old colleague of mine used to collect stuff from World War II. He was trying to piece together a paratrooper medical basket that they dropped during, in the days before D-Day. And one of the things he was really struggling to find, for a variety of reasons, was the drug, the pain-killing drug that they had back then.
Morphine,
yeah, the syringes of morphine. They did still exist. Some of them did, with the needle, with the cap, and all of that. And they were the kind that if somebody found them and they found that you had, they would take them off you because they would consider incredibly dangerous relative for now. They wouldn't want anybody ever using them. That said, it has been 50, 60 years, and the fact that the steel was still good on a glass vial of morphine was impressive.
There is something that I know that is older than World War II that is still safe to eat.
Go on.
So, during World War One, a normal thing for a soldier's ration would be canned bread. What would end up happening is that they would can bread and cook it in the can. As long as the seal on the can was still good, then the thing basically can last forever. Because we don't actually know how long a can of canned bread can actually last for, because we haven't had cans of them long enough.
Oh, so that
What about
that
that
would
makes
mean-
them last so long?
no, but so even anaerobic bacterial life inside it got killed or something?
Oh yeah, because it was cooked in the can. That killed off pretty much all the bacteria in the can. And as long as the seal is good and it stays dry, the bread will stay good for as long as the seal remains. It's incredibly dry, and that's exactly what you'd expect from something in a can that's supposed to stay dry. But we don't know what its upper limit is because we just haven't had them long enough.
Yeah, if you go back to, we haven't got 200-year-old food to compare it against. So,
Like we people are still finding cans of World War I era and earlier still canned bread that's still edible.
that's impressive.
Yeah, but those are some very specific conditions to have it air sealed and then cook it while it's still air sealed. That's actually kind of clever to kill off the
The fact that
bacteria
it's
while
even-
not letting external bacteria come back in after heating it up.
That it's still possible is or the fact that you can do it with that implies that there are other ways of doing it with other things.
But it's combining two known preservation techniques, canning and drying.
But yeah, there are some rather strangely specific things that can preserve information longer than usual. Just think about fossilization, an incredibly specific, combination of factors that
Wouldn't want to
allow-
eat a fossil. I don't care. I don't care how good it tasted when it was good. I'm not eating a freaking T-Rex bone.
There is
No.
like
I mean,
like some beef stock, like Nexus suggests here, is still good from the 1800s.
yeah, no, I'm not saying that fossilization is the way to go. I'm just saying there are some surprising
Interesting preservation
of
techniques.
known factors that lead to, surprising outcomes, let's put it that way, of preserving information that entropy would otherwise erode.
There is also one other thing that I've heard that has an effective shelf life that's infinite and gets better while in the can. After World War II, the American government tasked the University of Washington to make cheese in a can that can survive really long periods of time. This is not like Cheese Whiz for other Americans watching. This is more like
That's what I was
blocks
so
of
worried it was
cheddar.
going to be.
It's blocks of
Frickin' Cheese
cheddar
Whiz.
inside of a can. And the longer the can stays sealed, the better it gets.
It's a problem because cheese is inherently just growing bacteria.
I mean, yeah, that's basically what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid other life forms, no matter how small they are, from getting to it first.
Yes, Nexus. It goes into the can before it's matured. So it's pretty... I'm pretty sure it's canned in an airtight and air-free environment, and is then it's then matured in the can. So there's no outside bacteria in the can from the get-go, and only the bacteria that's supposed to be there from the cheese is in the can.
It's like the slowest made Wensleydale ever.
And I've heard that it tastes pretty good. It tastes pretty salty the longer it tastes, because salt crystals develop inside the cheese as you have it there. And it tastes like a pretty good cheddar.
It's like salted cheddar. That's my brain is just trying to wrap my head around the chemistry of how that even works. That's impressive. The fact they managed to even do that is impressive.
Kudos to the brave guys who actually try that stuff.
Oh, let's not get this twisted. There are people out there that have filth parties to prove that germ theory was a thing. So let's not get twisted on the matter that people are more than willing to try some pretty questionable shit to make sure that that science is carried on. Like that brings up a story. Like anyone who was in the South of America that's still listening, if there's even anyone else besides Nexus at this point, there was a disease that afflicted the people of the southern, well, basically people below the Mason-Dixon line in North America, and it was called pellagra. Every year, it would flare up in, I believe, springtime, and basically they would get like red rashes across their skin. They would kind of pale, and some people would go mad from this. And often people would die. Like it wasn't the most deadly of conditions, but people could die from this. People at the time thought it was based on some sort of germ, because this was when germ theory was becoming more and more prevalent and was accepted as the means for an awful lot of disease being the case, even when sometimes it wasn't, like in the case of pellagra. Pellagra is it's a deficiency. It's basically a niacin deficiency. And it was a part of the Southern diet why this happened. So the Southern diet at the time was predominantly cornbread, fatback bacon, and molasses. And this doesn't have a lot of the nutritional content that you'd need to keep your body fine. So when they found this out, or they thought that this was a deficiency disease, they investigated this via a filth party, where they got a pellagra sufferer, and they basically like swabbed his nose and then basically ingested his nose drippings. They made pills from his pee, poop, and other vital fluids and consumed that. Basically ate pellagra scabs from the victim, and none of them got pellagra. They basically had confirmed at that point that pellagra was not caused by some sort of disease. It was a deficiency. Sure, they got really sick afterwards, but they didn't get any of the symptoms that pellagra had. So, sorry for that long tangential story, but that kind of just shows the length and breadth of humans and how willing they are to do quite disgusting things for science.
Science, you monster.
The sacrifices for science, like the first ever photos of a volcanic eruption by that brave geologist who, didn't quite make it out alive, shielding his photo film with his body. But hey, at least he got, novel science photos of what it actually looks like, and, greatly contributed to something he literally sacrificed his life to discover.
All right, so I believe that's all the topics I've got here. So let's call a very short break, and we'll get on to the Q&A section. If anyone who's still listening has any more questions, please leave them in the chat, and we'll get to you when we get to you.
Mr. P, how's it going in Equestria? I'm another world away, but Billy, you look so pretty, yes you do. Rainbow ain't got nothing on you. Hey dear Mr. B, don't you worry, don't you fret. I'll be there if you get lonely, even though we've never met, we'll start to fly. Listen to my voice, it tells no lie. eyes. Hey girl, I really love your eyes. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up somewhere very far, a land I've only heard about before. And the first thing that I'm gonna do is search right across the land for you, because you are the pony I adore. And I swear I love you forevermore. Hey there, Mr. P, got so much that I want to say. If only I could speak with you, I know I'd find a way to say it all. Together into love we'd fall. My sweet Mr. B, I know that this song is getting long. It's meant to be so simple. I just don't know what went wrong. It's all for you. You know that I'll always come through. My derby hooves, this song's for you. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up somewhere very far, a land we've only heard about before. And first thing that I'm gonna do is search right across the land for you, because you are the pony I adore. And I swear I'll love you forevermore.
Derpy, honey, how's it going all the way out there in Equestria? I'm a whole world away, but let me tell you something, Philly. You just look so pretty. Yes, indeed. And child, Rainbow Dash ain't got nothing on you.
Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up somewhere very far, a land I've only heard about before. The first thing that I'm gonna do is search right across the land for you, because you are the pony I adore. And I swear I'll love you forevermore.
And we're back for the final segment of our show tonight. It's going to be much shorter since we had unfortunately a short draw of questions this week. But let's get right into them. So these are some questions for Francium. Seeing as you are an engineer, do you have any insights on power armor?
It's not as far-fetched as people think. The main thing behind power armor is the power. The motors we can do, the sensing system to kind of make it react to your body we can do, or that needs to get a bit better. But exoskeletons do already exist. They're being used in Japan and China to help people lift things on construction sites, but they usually end up being tethered. and they're used for quite specific things. So unloading vehicles is one of them on difficult sites. But yeah, it's effectively strapped to your body, but most of the load is taken through a load of motors and servos through it instead. So they do exist. The actual power armor, we're probably not that far off. Alien power loaders, we're getting pretty close to those. I don't know why you'd actually want to build one, but people have got pretty close to making something that's similar to that. And again, it's just a matter of powering the things. Motors and servos and hydraulics to make them move already exist. It's a portable power system that's capable of driving the number of amps required to just make the thing move.
Well, what about magical energy weapons then?
What about them? Just whether they're possible or what kind of thing that they do.
Do you have any particular insights on them?
When I went out of my way to create new weapons for Ouroboros, I deliberately didn't want them to be like anything that already existed. I wanted this weird mix of science, this magic and technology, which is how you ended up with this effectively like coil gun, rail gun system, Gauss weapons, effectively. Trying to keep them as just quite a rare weapon. Trying to keep most of the guns in the story to be standard projectile weapon. And there are some exceptions with the Enclave being involved and whatever was found in Skybolt 25. But yeah, trying to keep in the Ouroboros and just keep them few and far between. Nothing from a particular technical standpoint, because they're magical energy weapons. If they were Gauss or plasma based, then I can see that kind of working. But again, it's a lot of things become a lot more possible when you've got more power available. Right now, actually, with electric cars and batteries and drones and phones, it's the power source. Even now, like what is it? The new aircraft carriers. The US have gone nuclear, and the Brits have gone diesel electric on that front. There's no point in having a nuclear powered device at the minute. You need to you got to put bullets on the thing anyway, and you got to put other things on there like people and food and rations, so you might as well top it up with diesel at the same time. I guess the kind of same goes for those energy weapons, being the fact that keeping them topped up with power to make them work in the first place is a lot more effort than it was worth. So
you're suggesting that energy weapons are kind of an inefficient energy sink?
Right now they are. It may eventually get to the point where something like a Star Trek, I guess, phaser or a laser-based system works. But it's surprising how efficient just igniting a lump of or igniting some black powder of some description or some explosive and firing a lead slug at somebody is. They're doing rail guns and stuff in ships because then they don't have to carry around giant explosives. So if the ship gets hit, it's less likely to be fatal. Like World War II, you'd drop a tall boy on the bow of a ship, punches down into the ammunition stores and blows the ship in half with one shot. If you do that with a railgun system, where you've got just batteries and
big old pieces of metal to launch out of it.
Yeah, there's nothing to explode. It's like taking away the gunpowder out of a cannon. You can't blow up a lead ball, or a lead ball isn't going to explode. So
I mean, I think it's a similar concern to, for example, with some of the flying taxis, because the problem with electrical let's just say in simple terms, energy storage is that it doesn't get more lightweight as it gets depleted. So, for example, for takeoff and landing, they'd use, for example, the they still use combustion, but for the gliding flight, they use the electrical energy just because it's still so much in its infancy that it's just so much more practical to use more mature combustion for power generation for a lot of stuff, especially when it has to be lightweight, right?
Petrol, diesel, all of those chemicals are far more power dense than a battery. However, the engines are drastically less efficient. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I'm pretty sure most internal combustion engines are only like 40% of the energy that is contained within the fuel is actually turned into useful work, like at most. Pathetic, relatively. So much is converted to heat, so much is converted to noise, that it's really not great as a method. I mean, but the problem is it's completely overshadowed by the fact that there's so much power in the fuel in the first place.
So it doesn't
mean,
matter
it's just
if
getting
it's
it out.
burning at a really inefficient rate. You start off with a bigger lump sum to begin with, and can get
Yeah,
some
so
get
right
a good
now,
chunk
yeah.
out of it.
Yeah, so right now that's why that works.
Yes.
Whereas this is quite apparent now at small scales, because you couldn't have had a petrol-powered drone, but you can have a battery-powered drone. You used to have petrol-powered model planes and model helicopters. You can now have far more efficient and longer-running electric planes and helicopters. You can still get nitro helicopters, for example, but they only run for 2 or 3, 3 or 4 minutes at the most. If you're careful with a battery-powered plane, or battery-powered helicopter, you can make them go for 10 to 12 minutes. Whereas a petrol engine is going to draw exactly the same amount of power at all times, constantly, pretty much. Yes, you can tone it down, but it needs a certain amount just to keep going. Whereas a battery one, you could dial it right down in a much more controlled manner. So a electric motor is like 96% efficient. Our issue is the batteries. Our issue is storing the power, which again kind of brings us back to the power armor. It's storing that power. Like Big Dog had at times, they strap a giant diesel generator or a petrol, like a tiny little 2-stroke petrol engine to it to generate the power to make the thing run. That's what they used to have. Now they have batteries. The technology has moved on in the 3 or 4 years that it's been developed, and now there is enough capacity for them to be able to run that machine just on batteries rather than having to rely on a generator. The technology is making it there. So, like, it's like the Tesla, the electric cars. The power density isn't quite there relative to fuel, but the efficiency massively makes up for it. And there's also a reason, like the Rimac, the Grand Tour, when they did the Rimac, the Lamborghini, and they had the NSX all lined up, and the Rimac just left the other two completely for dead. It may not have quite the same range as the other two, but if you want to put the power down and you want to disappear, that's more than capable. So right now, our issue is actually battery capacity, storing that power.
I mean, would you argue that mankind basically is only just starting to move away from, thermal energy causing, expansion of gases in some way or form, as you see with the nuclear power plant, where we basically are just harvesting the thermal energy of it, Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's such a good point, because steam engines are fundamentally expanding gases.
Yeah.
Well, pretty much like most of our modern power generation fundamentally boils down to a steam engine.
It's boiling, it's heating up water in some description and putting it through a turbine. Yeah. That's the good thing about that is it's an easy cycle. It's easy to cycle round. There's lots of water, and with it's running in a nuclear power plant, you can have a closed loop system where you heat the water up, it goes through the turbine, recondenses, and then is cycled round and round and round. You don't need to waste the water to do it, which is why it works.
But you're wasting a lot of the energy, I guess.
No, nuclear power plants are actually surprisingly efficient. It's just
people have this inbuilt fear of nuclear power, even though not every nuclear power station is Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, or Fukushima.
And those three are first gen. All three of them are first generation nuclear power plants.
This is a key point I want to make about nuclear, and this is the only time we'll ever delve into politics on this show without good reason. The reason why those particular things went bad was not because nuclear is bad, it's because people are dumb.
As like the show Chernobyl pretty damn well showed, it wasn't even necessarily the reactor's fault. Yeah, the reactor had a flaw, but it wasn't fixed because of the pride of the Russians. And at the time it was created through human error. So
Fukushima,
the fact that there are still
another big example of that. Fukushima, we're told repeatedly, fix your damn tidal wall. And then they didn't fix the tidal wall, and then got hit with a fucking tsunami. Whose fault is that then, motherfuckers? When
it's
you get
amazing
told,
what people
fix
won't
your damn
do.
walls, fix them.
Yeah, but back to your original point on the efficiency of nuclear, because that was actually interesting, that you brought that up, that it's actually not as inefficient as one would think.
Nuclear power is very efficient, and let's be fair, it's realistically the best middle-term solution for our energy crisis.
Yeah. Let Fran explain. Let him finish.
Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I'm not hyper knowledgeable about nuclear power. It's in some way, Gear is right. It's a pretty damn good stopgap. It doesn't produce. I mean, we're producing. Everyone's like, oh my god, what are you going to do with all those nuclear fuel rods? And it's like, well, the material exists already. It's nuclear. We're just digging it out of the ground and actually putting the damn thing to use. Yeah, we're refining it, but I would much rather have that. Which, okay, fine, it needs to be buried underground in a giant concrete vault for the rest of 50,000 years, than have
a planet that's
the
on
entire
fire.
thing get flooded. Yes, pretty much. I can deal with the former. You can deal with the former.
The problem,
and everyone's just inherently scared of it because of the name. But people forget there's a reason. You've got a microwave. It works with radiation. Light hitting your eyeballs, radiation. Mobile phone, radiation.
Can I please step in?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
This is the thing with nuclear power. The problem with nuclear power is that people are scared of the consequences, and there is reason to be scared of the consequences because nuclear problems are kind of dangerous to human life in the very short term if you expose yourself to them. But dealing with nuclear waste in the long term is much, much safer because your concern isn't that you can't dispose of it because there's plenty of space we can dispose of it safely. That's not even a problem. The problem is that we don't want someone, wandering around in bumfuck nowhere in 100,000 years' time from now and go, ooh, this looks like a nice place, and then gets ass cancer from all the waste we put there. That's not what we want to avoid, but that's a much easier problem to avoid than the planet being dead. Like I said, this will be the only time we will ever delve into politics on this show, but this is the very important one. Nuclear power is not something to be so scared of because it's a far, far in the future problem we have to deal with, not the planet is on fire right now problem to deal with.
Annoying. We're getting closer and closer to having fish. Does it fission or fusion?
We had fission. There was the a place in France that had the first self-sustaining fission reaction that generated more power than it was needed to keep it going.
Yeah, we finally cracked that, and then, well, the only reason it stops working is, I say the only reason is because it gets so hot it destroys the internal walls of the reactor.
But yeah, that's a complicated thing that I think we will solve probably in the next 25 to 50 years. We will have fission power.
If we're still here in 25 to 50 years.
But yeah, that's a whole nother question. So let's leave politics buried for now, guys, because
and all the nuclear waste.
Yes, we'll leave that all buried too. We'll bury it all in the same place, and probably with fucking blackjack too. But yeah, let's bury this issue and move on to ending the show for the night. This has been a very long show tonight, and I do apologize that we won't get through all of your questions, Nexus, but it is getting kind of late. So,
has he got a final question? We got 10 minutes, I guess.
I mean, we have two more questions? Two more questions?
Let's say we can take 5 minutes on each of them, and you just hammer us to stick to the point.
Okay, so sorry, 3 questions. Personal headcanon on Zeebs within FOE.
I've got one. I've got a Zeeb. I didn't plan exactly where she'd come from, but I've got no problem with having Zeebs in FOE. That's not a problem. I suspect there would have been some on Equestrian soil when it all went tits up. So that's fine.
It's practically confirmed that there were like a bunch on Equestrian soil. Like Zebra Town was a place, Glyphmark is a place. All of them. Lots of Zeebs.
Yeah. So we're not short of Zeebs. That's fine. Yeah. Whether they would all survive is no. I can see that working, because I suspect it's the whole thing of they're not going to hold the grudge for long enough for it to matter. 200 years is a long time. So after 200 years, they would have known. It all went tits up because of the Zeeb.
Let's be fair. Racism in our own world has existed for longer than 200 years. So let's not be completely deluding ourselves that it's not impossible for people to be assholes 200 years.
Oh yeah, they still would be. But I don't think they'd have killed all of them.
No,
so,
of course not.
There we go. So I guess that's my point on Zeebs. I like Zeebs.
Any kind of personal niggles with this with FOE as a setting?
Sometimes I have to remind myself just how stuff went down right at the end with the missiles for the two sisters. I don't think so. I'm quite happy to let a lot of that settle as it is. Well, nothing really kind of stands out to me as any issues. I mean, it's amusing when people try to map out Equestrian, try and put it all down on a map. You're like, yeah, this is a handwritten story. I don't think they went that. I don't think it was quite mapped out, but it doesn't really affect things too much. And everyone else, whenever they write a fanfic, just takes their own view or map of the world as required. So that's not even a problem either.
It would be nice if there was an actual official map that took every single fic into consideration. That would be a pretty amazing project to get under. But
I mentally thought about it and went, yes, you know what? I think I've already found I found a collision within the first 2 or 3 books that I read that stated exactly the same thing was east of something, and it's like, yeah, that can't happen. It doesn't work, unfortunately, which is a shame because it'd be awesome if it could.
So, one more question: is there something that you would like to see done in a fic with its setting that few people seem to be doing? I think we actually kind of touched on this earlier, secession and that idea. That seems like something that hasn't been done that would be very interesting to have seen be done and be important to the lore of an area.
It would be interesting, but I don't think they could just tack it on to saying that, example, Philadelphia did secede before the end of the war, because it would massively change the way the war panned out.
Well, if it was,
And I
like,
don't think
say, a different town, like a different major city that wasn't ones mentioned in the core fix, if it was one of those, maybe that could work.
maybe something like Las Pegasus decided they were far enough away, in the desert, that they could pull that off. And it would also explain perhaps how good a state it's in quite a lot of the fix that you read. It's not been hit, which might explain that. So maybe Las Pegasus successfully pulled, or at the very least put some kind of barrier up. I don't mean like a physical barrier, a political thing separating themselves without having officially left. They started the process, or they were in talks to say that we're going to start our own, almost NCR style mini part of America, right, under their own rule, and separate themselves off.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I believe there are no more. And Nexus, don't ask any more, please. I'm trying to end the show in timely manner.
He can pester me personally if he wants.
All
right, when I've slept.
Yes. So, this has been Post-Apoc Horse Talk. Your hosts tonight have been Gallant Aegis and BG, and our guest tonight has been Francium. And until next time, keep your eyes trained and your gun in its holster, because you never know what the wasteland brings. And have a good evening.